Hey guys, what is up? SuperKmanrocks here, and we are here for my NACL Week 7 overview analysis, and at the end, my final power rankings for the split. We are in the final week of the regular season here in the NACL. That means playoffs are kicking off next week, or this weekend, the day after this video comes out. I'm incredibly excited to go over these games. There's a lot of good ones, especially because now we're really getting an idea of where these teams stand heading into the final weeks of the season, the final week of the season and into playoffs. Very excited to go over them. Power rankings are going to be a little bit different towards the end of this video because I'm probably going to have some pretty major changes. I've been pretty conservative with how I've been moving teams up and down, I would say, over the past few weeks. But now that we're jumping into playoffs, I'm not going to do a full bracket prediction. Instead, I'm just going to give you guys my power rankings, and that should give you a relatively decent idea how I think teams are going to be doing once we get to the playoff stage. So before we jump into any of that, of course, let me know down in the comments section below what you guys thought of Week 7 here in the NACL. What teams do you think are doing well? What teams do you think are not doing well? Who's going to succeed in playoffs? Who is going to maybe underperform considering the seed that they end up getting at the end of the week? I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts and feedback down below. But with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into it. We're, of course, going to be kicking off our coverage starting with day number 1. And day number 1 was definitely an intriguing one. Some matchups that I think are really going to have implications for not only playoff seeding, but playoff confidence heading down the road. So let's jump right into it, starting off with our first series of the week. Team Liquid Challengers taking on Wildcard Gaming. Two teams that have the same record going into this week, and they're going to continue that here as they split 1-1. Wildcard taking game 1, Team Liquid taking game 2. I think that there were positives and negatives for both teams coming out of this, but overall, I think TL definitely controlled the pacing of the series. They had most of the positive notes, especially in that game number 2, where they were really good, but I would say their game number 1 was mostly them losing rather than Wildcard taking advantage of any, like, major mistakes, right? Like, it was mostly TLC just kind of making problems and Wildcard doing a good job to make sure that they were capitalizing on them, I should say. But let's talk about Team Liquid first, because my player of the series is going to go to Arrow in the bot lane. I thought he was relatively okay in game number 1. I mean, nobody on TL was really all that dominant in game 1, but he had a great game 2 on that Varus. He's been very hit or miss. I'll say this bot lane in general for TLC has been pretty hit or miss over the course of the split so far, but I think they're fine. They're certainly they're better than the bottom tier of bot lanes. I'll definitely say that. At worst, they're a mid-tier bot lane in the NACL, and I think that's good enough to be able to win games. I think especially going up against a team like Wildcard, where their bot lane is certainly not the lane that they want to play to the most. I think you can take advantage of a lot of the mistakes that they end up making. Not that Lens and Duo King are bad as players, but just rather that I think a team like TL that wants to invest into a player like Arrow and somebody who I think is relatively okay in the 2v2, I think can take advantage of a lane that isn't necessarily going to get the same kind of resources from their own team. So Arrow's going to get my player of the series here, but he wasn't the only player on Team Liquid that I thought played well. APA in game number 2. APA continues to be this team's best player, in my opinion, and one of the better players in the entire league. He pulls out the Aurelion Soul, obviously. He was very well known for this pick before the rework. I'm sure he still enjoys playing it now that he's even stronger after the rework. Aurelion's just kind of one of those picks, right? If you pick it up and you can survive the early game, you're probably going to be able to do a lot of damage towards the back half. It's very similar to Kassadin in that regard, and so to see it be pulled out here, not entirely surprising, especially when you've got a player like APA that has done a really good job being able to play towards the early game and being able to play for his win conditions, right? If he knows he's going to be on scaling, he's going to be able to play it well. So the carry roles of Team Liquid definitely stepping up here, but there were definitely some question marks on TL, and that's why my dud of the series is also going to stay in the bot lane for Team Liquid, and it's going to go to Kim down in the support position. While this bot lane I thought had a really good game in game number 2, game number 1 certainly rose some question marks. That Nautilus game from Kim down in game number 1 was just bad. I know sometimes your KDA is going to look a lot worse playing a champion like Nautilus when you're losing than maybe it would in other scenarios, but still, you gotta be able to know when to go in and when not to go in, and it felt like that Nautilus was just a complete negative pick in game number 1. To me, that was the worst game of the series from either team. I think realistically, you could give this to Mir, though, as well. I don't think either were particularly great. Mir was kind of out-jungled, I would say, especially in Game 1. He was heavily out-jungled in Game 1, but Game number 2 wasn't all that fantastic either from him. I really have not been impressed with Mir as a player over the course of the season, and I think if Team Liquid continues to struggle, that's probably the area that I would expect to struggle the most. There were a lot of really talented junglers here in the NACL, and it just doesn't feel like Mir has been able to keep up with a lot of them over the course of the split, especially in the early game. Kimdown I have a little bit more faith in. I know he didn't exactly have a great series here, but, he's been pretty good, I would say, over the course of the split. Maybe not consistent. Him and Arrow haven't exactly been the most consistent bot lane, but when they win, they win, and they showed that in game number 2. As for Wildcard on the other side, decent showing. I would say you probably wanted to take both games, but Wildcard's just one of those teams that I think we're really starting to learn what their actual talent level is looking like. They really surprised a lot of people at the beginning of the season because some of the crazy picks that they were pulling out, the eclectic drafts, but I think teams have gotten a lot more used to it and are getting better at being able to counter that or just take it away in general. But on the flip side, I think they are getting better at playing standard comps. I think Saligo in particular has been a boon to this team, a huge, huge boon to this team. I think without the consistency out of the mid lane from Wildcard, a lot of these games would be a lot harder. I think Saligo has quietly been one of the more interesting mid laners in the entire region. I thought Moose Hater had a really good game number 1 here. Now, he didn't have a particularly good game number 2, but I don't think most of Wildcard had a particularly good game number 2, but I gotta shout out Moose Hater did a lot of good work, especially in that side lane in game number 1. And there really isn't a lot of players on Wildcard to point out as like major negatives. Yeah, they didn't play great in game number 2, but I would say overall the team was relatively fine, and the solo laners definitely stepped up. I still like Keel a lot as a jungler. I think he's underrated. Lens and Duo King, while they're kind of the weak side for Wildcard, I would definitely say certainly aren't the weakest bot lane in the entire region or anything like that. I think this team just really likes investing in its solo laners, in particular, trying to get them ahead. So these two teams, relatively similar in terms of talent level. I feel a little bit better about Team Liquid coming out of this series than I feel about Wildcard, but I don't think either of these teams are really all that far off from each other, and I think that was shown off here. And then moving on to our second series of day number 1 here, it's a battle between two teams that have really struggled to get going. We had Team Liquid first take it on CLG Faith. And TL First takes the 2-0 series win. It's their first 2-0 series win of the year, and it comes in the final week of the season. Big win for them. Obviously, this was kind of expected. CLG Faith has really struggled to play against everybody in the league. They only have one game win over the course of the year so far, and that was against FlyFam, the other worst team in the league. And so CLG Faith definitely not performing at a very good level right now, and that's kind of being shown off here. TL First with a decent series though, and this really is the first time that we get to highlight how good Surdy has been. I know we've talked about him a bit over the course of the year so far, but I feel really bad for him because he has been one of the more interesting top laners in the entire NACL. He's just been stuck on a team that really hasn't been able to play around him at all, but we finally got to see him unlocked in this series, and he's going to get player of the series for it. That Shogath game in game 1, the Jace game in game 2, both were spectacular, phenomenal, and great. I don't really have no other words for it. They were awesome. He was great, and he has been great over the course of the year. It does feel like he's a little bit elo stuck on this TLF team. I would imagine that he's probably going to get a challenger spot either next split or very, very soon because he absolutely deserves it. And he's proven that over the course of the year. This team hasn't exactly been living up to, I guess, expectation, or at least this team hasn't exactly been dominating the standings, but Surdy as a player has definitely lived up to expectations and has exceeded them, in my opinion. He was far from the only player on TLF that was good here. Aspect had another really good series. He was going into one of the weaker mids in the region, in the NACL, and, I've been calling Aspect maybe the weakest mid in the NACL, so to see him come out and just beat up Town 2 straight games, especially on that Jason game number 1, it's a really good sign. Aspect, I think, has been a lot better as of recent, and obviously it's not the toughest competition in the world, but at the very least being able to win the matchup so convincingly and having a very good series, I think, is a good sign overall. And then LJX, the bot laner. I've been very critical of LJX. I've said that LJX, since coming into, TLF, has been probably the worst player in the NACL. Well, finally, a really, really good game coming out from him in that, I believe that game 1 on the Varus. It was the Varus game. It was either game 1 or game 2. I believe it was game 1. And that's just incredibly exciting. It's good to see a player that has really struggled have an opportunity to show off what he's really about. He was kind of thrust into this team really without a lot of preparation as far as I'm aware. And, it's been a little bit of a difficult transition, I would say, overall from him. But I think this game showed that he does have talent. It probably just took a little bit of time to be able to get that talent out. So those three players, Surdy, Aspect, LJX, definitely the standouts on TLF for me in this series. And then for CLGF on the other side, it's the same story as it has been pretty much all year. It's the solo lanes just not really being able to handle all the pressure that they're being put under. Bajani is going to get my dud of the series here. Top lane was just a black hole for them in this series, and that definitely showed off. Surdy, the strength of TLF's, Bajani probably the weakness of CLGF, and that really was shown off here. Obviously, Bajani is somebody who I've been very low on over the course of the year. He has talent. Obviously, we've seen him be able to have good games here or there. It's just the consistency that has come with him, and unfortunately, it just felt like he was promoted up into this level, this NACL level, a little bit too soon, and I think that was shown off in this series. Town, another player that I think had a pretty bad series, was just completely outplayed by Aspect in that mid lane matchup, really never had any sort of pressure, and it allowed that TLF team to really control the map and be able to push forward. Obviously, he was another player that was kind of thrust into his situation, was given this opportunity way late into the season, similar to Aaron on the same team, and then obviously similar to LJX over on TLF, but he also has been someone that I really don't think has been particularly great given the opportunity, and unfortunately for CLGF, it just seems to be the team that they are. They're really not all that hyper competitive right now. They're really not a team that's going to be able to go up against anybody in the NACL. I think they have proven at this point that they are the weakest team in the region, and I don't really think that there's going to be a lot that changes that. As for TLF on the other side, this is a fantastic win, your first of the season in terms of a 2-0, and that's got to feel really good. Some of these players really are starting to impress me, obviously Surdy in particular, but Aspect having a good series, LJX having a good series, I think City Witty's been all right. Rovex had a better series here than he has in the past. I think that there are positives to build on here for TLF. I'm not exactly sure it means that they're going to turn their entire series around. This still feels like potentially a bottom 3 team in the league, but at the very least, being able to pick up this win here is a good sign that you're not dead in the water completely. And then moving on to our third series of the week. It's a pretty good one. Two teams that I was really interested to see go head-to-head because both of them have been playing really well as of recent. We had CLG Challengers taking on Cloud9 Challengers, and CLG picking up the 2-0 series win. Cloud9 losing a series 0-2 in the final week of the season. Not exactly what you want to see from a team that most consider to be the best in the NACL right now, but huge win for CLG, and they looked pretty good doing it. Now, these were both rather slow games, I would say, overall. Neither were really these dominant bloodbath, super hyper-aggressive, active games. But honestly, that's kind of been Cloud9's style over the course of the year so far. Anyways, especially after they lost Eminus, after they switched him out for Diplex. Diplex, I think, coming in has certainly made the pacing, I would say, of the team go down quite a bit. But that's okay. I mean, you can often win a lot of games playing at that pace. It's just, I actually think this benefited CLG a lot because their mechanical skill in the last half of the game is huge. If you let the game get to that team fight phase, CLG is really good at that phase of the game, and that was shown off here. My player of the series is going to go to Breezy, the support here for CLG. He was just so ridiculously spectacular for this team in the back half of the series. That Rakan game, I mean, he is so good at that champion. It's almost unfair to continue to let him have it. I'm surprised it isn't perma-banned against CLG at this point. Every single time that he has played that champion, not only this year, but in years past, it has been a huge nuisance for every team that goes into him because you can't land anything on him. He's incredibly mobile, he is incredibly slippery, and he attracts a lot of attention because if you do ignore him, he can really screw up your entire game plan, especially in these late game team fights. So big credit to Breezy. He's been really good this year in my opinion. And so has Meech. I think the bot lane here was definitely the standout members for CLG. I think Meech was probably the more active member. I think he led the team in kill participation, something like that. He was really good for the team just in general, but him and Breezy, I think, have developed such a good chemistry together that it's really hard to separate which one of them is playing more active and more positive, I would say, in general. So Meech, Breezy, kind of co-players of the series, in my opinion, but I'm going to give it to Breezy, especially for that Rakan game. The other player I want to shout out on the side of CLG is going to be Kevy in the jungle. I think this was a pretty big jungle gap on the side of CLG. They definitely had a lot of the pressure over the course of the series, and I think Kevy generally just doesn't get the same kind of credit that a lot of the other top junglers in the region get. He's pretty solid. He may not be the most dominant mechanical player in the entire world, but he is often creating and generating leads for his team, and he plays off of his mid laner incredibly well, and I think it's a very big positive for CLG to have him as a player. On the side of Cloud9, though, not nearly as good of a series. You were okay in Game 2, you had some moments, but you left it up to late game team fighting, and CLG was able to take that from you. My dud of the series is going to go to Tomio in the jungle, and I know looking at the KDAs that might not really like shine through, but I really do think if Tomio had a better game, and especially a better team fighting phase in game number 2, we're looking at a super easy game to win for Cloud9. He just didn't play that second half all that well, and for me, that was enough to get him done of the series, because I don't think anybody was like particularly awful. We'll get to Lost in a second. I think he's the other player that you could definitely consider for this, but and Tomio's actually been kind of good this year for the team. I think when you're talking about the Shade and Tomio swap that them and Evil Geniuses went over, I thought Evil Geniuses was going to win that in the offseason. He definitely looked like he was going to win that, in the first couple of weeks when Shaden like really popped off in week 2. But as we've gotten further and further into the season, Tomio's really settled in for Cloud9. Unfortunately, that just didn't translate into a very important series against CLG here, and he's going to get my dud of the series for it. I also got to point out that CLGC's bot lane was really good here. C9C's bot lane was really bad here. Lost and Zeyzal did not step up. This was one of their worst performances of the year, in my opinion, especially as a duo. Neither of them really coming to each other's rescue. Usually, at least one of the players in that bot lane performs relatively okay. Zeyzal can go in and int sometimes, but Lost can be good in team fights. Or Lost can sometimes be out of position and can be picked on by the enemy support, but Zeyzal can be in positions where he's able to roam around the map and create positives for Cloud9. It's very rare for both of these players to have a bad series at the same time, but in my opinion, that's exactly what happened here for Cloud9. So overall, just kind of hoping that this is a just flash in the pan, bump in the road for C9. This is a team that I really want to see play at the highest level, and I think for a lot of fans, they're probably the best team in NACL, so to see them get thoroughly beaten here by CLGC is not a great sign, but it is a great sign if you're a CLG fan, because this was a really good showing. Not only did you beat arguably the best team in the NACL, but you did it without having Copy, your best player, pop off in that same kind of way. Your bot lane really stepped up, your jungle really stepped up, and that's a really good sign. CLG is genuinely a very good team and a very scary team to go up against, and I think they're going to prove that as we get into the playoffs here. And then moving on to our 4th series of the day. I was really excited for this one. This is, really, really going to be an interesting series to talk about, because both of these teams, I think, looking good in each of their respective wins. We had 100 Thieves Challengers taking on Cincinnati Fear, and it's 1-1, like I said, but both games kind of being relative blowouts here, and I think it's a good sign, generally speaking, for both teams that they were able to take advantage of each other in such dominant ways at least once. I think both of these teams have proven that they are upper-tier teams, maybe close to top-tier teams in the NACL, and I think that was shown off in this series. We'll talk about the Fear first, because they dominated that game number 1, only giving over 1 kill on the side of 100 Thieves, and honestly, they looked really good doing it. The 2 players that I really want to shout out, in particular, Perry in the jungle, who I thought was Fear's best player over the course of this series here. Not only was he really good in game 1, but he was the driving force for keeping Fear as close as they were in game number 2. I thought Perry was just generally awesome and definitely out-jungled Yukino across both of these games. It's a really good sign. Perry's a player that I've been really high on for a while. Really liked him on Dignitas last year. Continue to really like him on Fear this year. Really talked about that over the course of the beginning part of the season, in particular, how awesome he had been. I think he had been giving over a little bit more resources in the past few weeks, and I think he took him back in this one. Definitely a really good series from him. But the other player I got to shout out is Shochi in the mid lane. Really good game number 1 on the Orianna coming out from Shochi. Obviously, I'm very high on Shochi as a player, as a prospect in the mid lane. Wasn't really super knowledgeable about Shochi, obviously, going into the year. Someone who, didn't watch a ton of amateur before Proving Grounds last year, but to see him come in and really dominate a lot of the mid laners that I hold in pretty high regard, it just proves that he is one of the more interesting mid lane talents in the entirety of North America right now, and I think that was proven again in this series. It's not like Pretty is, a mid laner that is going to just roll over and die. He was really good last year. I do think he's been a little bit weaker across 2023, but still really good Orianna game coming out from Shochi, and it's certainly not the first time that he has had a fantastic game this split. So jungle mid, definitely the 2 members that are jumping out for me for Fear, but the players that I think played a little bit under my expectations, I would say, especially in that game number 2, and I hate to say it, it's Manui, again, in the bot lane, and I hate to just, rag on Manui, because it feels like I always talk about him in a negative light, and I do really like him as a player, and I think he has grown so much over the course of this split already, but that game number 2, unfortunately, just wasn't very good. He was targeted quite a bit by 100C, and obviously 100C's bot lane is really good and really hard to play into, but it just felt like they definitely had that advantage in game 2. I would say outside of that, though, Fear was really only showing good things, I would say, across both of these games, especially especially that mid-jungle duo that continues to grow and continues to get better. Really, really like this team, and I think they are going to be sneaky threats for like top 3, top 4 once we get to playoff time, and yeah, we'll talk about that at the end of the video, but this is a very good showing from them, and it's a good showing from 100 Thieves as well. I don't want to take that away from them. I think both teams look better because of this series, and, you know, I'm willing to talk about that. My player of the series is actually going to go to Destiny on the side of 100 Thieves. Anybody who has watched this channel over the course of the year knows how high I am on Destiny as a player. I just really like what he's able to do in lane and out of lane. I think him and Unforgiven are consistently being able to generate leads. Even when they're down in gold, they are so useful towards the back half of games that it's very difficult, it feels like, to play into them. I can't imagine what it's like to have to game plan for something like that, but he had another really good series here. I think Unforgiven was also really good, especially in that game number 2, but Destiny, in my opinion, really good across both games in this series, and that game 2 in particular from him was dominant and very, very scary to go into. That was a big reason why I think Manui had a really hard time getting ahead in game number 2, was Destiny really going for those engages, going for those aggressive plays, and not really being able to deal with that in a proper way. Destiny's really, really good when he gets ahead. He can take advantage of that, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, I would say, for 100 Thieves. I don't think the top side of the map actually played all that well. Yukino's going to get my dud of the series here. He was quite out-jungled by Perry in both games. Even in game 2, where 100 Thieves was able to generate a solid lead, it really felt like Yukino was on the back foot, I would say, for a bit of that game. He definitely rebounded and had a good second half of that game, but game number 1 was a disaster for the jungler here for 100 Thieves, and I've been a lot lower on Yukino over the course of the season. I think if you're looking at an area on 100 Thieves that has kind of been the weak point of the team, it's been the jungle mid duo. I like Pretty as a player. I like Yukino as a prospect, but I don't think either has really stepped up and proven to me that they are like top tier threats in their role, especially with a lot of the other players in those roles really showing off a lot of positives across the season, maybe that we didn't expect. And so if there is a part of 100 Thieves that's going to be, you know, holding them back in the playoffs, I would expect it to probably be jungle mid. I don't think Sniper played particularly well either, especially in that game 1 loss where he was just completely run off the map by Faisal, which is a good sign. Faisal's a really good player, but Sniper really needs to step up and play a little bit better. Obviously, it's hard to talk about this because he's getting benched for playoffs. Not benched, he's taken some time off. It's his decision, not the team's, and obviously we'll talk about that a bit when we get to the power rankings at the end of the week, because he does play the entirety of the week here, but he wasn't particularly great in this series either. Didn't really have a huge impact on either game. I would say overall, you know, Fear's mid-jungle duo looking great, 100 Thieves bot lane really looking great, and that's really the big takeaway for this series for me. I still think both teams were doing relatively well, and I'm definitely looking forward to seeing both teams once we get into playoff time, and generally speaking, I would say both teams are probably going to feel happy about how this series ended up working out for both of them. And then moving on to our 5th series of day 1, a little bit of a blowout here, 2 games that I would definitely not consider close. We had AoE Gold taking on FlyFam, and AoE looking really good with the 2-0 win, 2 dominating wins coming out from them, and that's a good sign. Again, AoE should be able to beat a team like FlyFam relatively comfortably. It's really good to see them come out and actually do it. Obviously, there are a lot of teams that I think, you know, especially recently, have not been able to take care of business against some of the teams that they absolutely should. AoE definitely doing that, and I think it's a good sign that they are able to do that just in general. Let's talk about the players that I really liked from them. The bot lane definitely jumps out here as a really, really good showing and a really, really good series for them. My player of the series is going to go to Skytech in that support position. I've been pretty critical, I would say, of Skytech over the course of the split so far. I haven't exactly been his biggest fan over the course of 2023. I liked, I guess, a little bit of what he was able to do in 2022 on Evil Geniuses, but for the most part, I would say he's just kind of been a little bit underwhelming for me as a support. Not in this series. He dominated a lot of these games. Incredibly active play coming out from him in both of them, and really, he was by far the big standout, like, flashy player, I would say, for AoE. Really good sign. I still think Lynx had a really good series as well. I said the bot lane in general. Lynx is definitely a part of that. You could definitely make the case that Lynx has been the best player on AoE. I would say it's probably been Darkwings, and I think Gamsu's had some good games as well, but I think Lynx has definitely been the most consistent. While he doesn't exactly, you know, always pop off, some of the games that he has are just a little bit meh. I would say he doesn't have the same kind of bad games that players like Darkwings and Gamsu have, and so it's good to see this bot lane be a little bit, I would say, consistent for AoE. I'm not exactly sure that they're going to be dominant, especially against some of the better teams in the league, and they've kind of shown that off. When they do play better teams, the bot lane can disappear a bit, bit, but it's good to see when they are given a mechanical advantage and given a team that they should be able to beat, that the bot lane can pretty consistently step up and beat them when they need to. Again, everybody on AoE played well. I'm just highlighting the bot lane. Darkwing's had a really good series. Winnie played some of the better League of Legends that he's played all year long. Gamsu had a fantastic game too on the Olaf. Basically everybody on AoE stepping up and playing well. In this one, it really was kind of a slaughter for them in both games, especially this game too, where it just felt like they could do no wrong. AoE in general just looking really, really good against a team that they absolutely should beat. And then FlyFam on the other side, this was a team that was kind of generating some momentum, I will say. They looked a lot better in the recent weeks than they did at the beginning of the season. I think bringing Hyper into the jungle really helped out this team a lot. Unfortunately, that didn't necessarily translate to the series. Hyper is going to get my dud of the series. I think you could realistically give this to a few people, but Hyper was definitely the one that was getting caught out the most. He was trying to make a lot of these aggressive plays, and honestly, that's why I didn't want to give him dud of the series. It's why, honestly, I didn't want to put him in here, because I do think he was trading a lot of negative plays on the side of FlyFam, but he was also taking risks, and I think that's what you need to do as a bottom team, as a team that isn't exactly in its form right now, to be able to surprise some teams. Yeah, those risks did not pay off, and a big part of that is why he's going to be my dead of the series here, but I would say overall, I would much rather him be making these plays, or at least trying to make these plays, than just sitting back and losing the game like I think some of the junglers on this team did before him. So generally speaking, I still think Hyper is an upgrade, just not a great series coming out from him. I would say topside in general for FlyFam wasn't great here. The other player I definitely considered was Lunacia, and I know I'm much lower on Lunacia than a lot of the other people. Yes, he does get a lot of solo kills. Yes, he does exert pressure in the lane, but I feel like his mid games are worse than almost anybody else in the region right now as a top laner, and I think that has been shown off in a lot of these games. I think that he really didn't have any pressure on the top side, especially in this game too against the Olaf, and that's just not something that you really want to see. You want him to see him be able to go up against a player like Gamsu, who I think, while he has his good games, has also had some really bad games this split, and at least be able to show off that you're able to go toe-to-toe with him. It just didn't really happen here. So top side of the map, not really stepping up for FlyFam. I think Blaze had a really bad game in the series as well, but again, the rest of the team was also really struggling. When your jungler's struggling, it makes your life as a mid laner a lot harder. I thought bot lane was mad, but that's kind of just been them all split long. They really haven't had a lot of good performances outside of their 1-1 draw last week, where I thought Sword and Instinct were pretty solid, but you really need this bot lane to step up. They're the veteran pieces on FlyFam, and they've honestly just been completely irrelevant, I would say, for this team over the course of the year. So looking at this series as a whole, FlyFam, not too shocked to see them drop 0-2. I just would have liked to see them maybe be a little bit more competitive with the team that hasn't exactly been dominant over the course of the year and certainly hasn't been consistent, but for AoE, what a pretty good time to get a 2-0 series win. I know you've gotten a couple of these, but this was probably one of the more dominant ones that I would say you've gotten over the course of the year so far. Just a good look from them, especially from this bot lane. When they get matched up against a bot lane that they can genuinely beat consistently, they do look very good. I still worry about them going up against some of the more mechanically talented teams in the league, even the mid-tier teams in the league. I still wonder if they're going to be able to hold their own against those, but it's good to see this bot lane be able to show that when they are given the opportunity to play from ahead, they look good doing so. I think the rest of the team also looked solid. Top side of the map is definitely improving. It's good to see Winnie have a good series. The solo laners have been inconsistent, but when they are on, they are definitely on. So generally speaking, I think AoE is going to walk out of this feeling pretty positive. And then moving on to our final series of the day here on day number 1. And it's an intriguing one. Two Challengers teams that aren't necessarily having the best of seasons. We had Immortals Challengers taking on Evil Geniuses Challengers, and IMT picks up the 2-0 series win. Big win for them. This is a team that definitely has looked better in recent weeks, but I want to call out first and foremost, Balulu's still playing here in Academy while also playing in the LCS. As far as I'm aware, they signed Yasui. I don't know if that's just going to be for playoffs or if it's going to be for next split. I don't know what the point of bringing Yasui in. Maybe they're just, giving him time to scrim with the team, but they're going to have Balulu play this week. I don't know when Yasui's going to come in, but as of this week, Balulu is playing for Immortals, and he played in this series, so that definitely was a benefit, I would say, overall for this team, because he is an incredibly solid mid lane player, and he definitely showed up and played better than Ryoma in this series. But talking about what Immortals did right, we got to talk about my player of the series, and there were two players that very much deserved it, and I felt bad that I couldn't give it to both of them, and so I'm going to talk about both of them, but both of them deserve it. My player of the series, my actual player of the series, is going to go to Wixie in the bot lane there. Really good series overall from Wixie. I know I've been pretty critical of him and how he's been able to play over the course of the year so far. I would say both Wixie, Chad, like ADD, these players I've been very critical of on Immortals, but I think Wixie does have moments where he looks really, really good, and this series was definitely one of them. Going up against Mobility, one of the weaker ADCs in the NACL, in my opinion, he definitely was able to take advantage of that. Smoothie has also not been playing well. Definitely was able to take advantage of the bot lane 2v2 and looked really, really good doing it. I think I have to be, I'm obligated, I'm contractually obligated to be a little bit nicer to Wixie now because his dad follows me on Twitter. Just kidding, obviously, but this was a really good series, I would say, overall from him. The other player that I gotta shout out is ADD in the top lane. I've been very critical of ADD, and I think the community generally has been very critical of ADD. I think top laners in general have kind of fallen into two categories when it comes to NACL fans, either very highly rated or very lowly rated. It feels like there really is a split right down the middle. There aren't a lot of just neutral top laners in the NACL right now. ADD has definitely fallen on the latter spectrum of that, but really, really good series coming out from him. He bodied Soul in that top lane matchup and really generated a lot of leads, and generally speaking was just fantastic. I really wanted to give him player of the series, but I feel like it would be kind of a shame if I didn't give it to Wixie in this one. So Wixie, ADD, both kind of player of the series here for Immortals, both playing really well. The other player that played well, I would say, on the side of Immortals was Chad in the jungle. I've been very critical of Chad. I would argue that I've been the most critical of Chad on the internet in terms of the analysts that cover the NACL, and I've always said that he has the talent and he has the ability to take over games. He's certainly a carry-oriented jungle player, but I found that it hasn't necessarily been a positive all the time for Immortals to be able to play for him. I think he had a much better series here, going into a very feast or famine, but very mechanically talented jungler in Shaden on the other side. It's good to see Chad come out of this looking really, really solid. Hopefully, this is the version of Immortals that we can get a little bit more consistently as we get towards the playoff scene, because I do like a lot of the players. They just haven't been able to show it all the time. As for EG on the other side, I'm just out. I have to be out on this team at this point. I don't really know what else to say. This is a team that has all the talent to be one of the better teams in the NACL, and they just have not been able to capitalize on it. It's their veterans that are kind of letting them down, too, as well. Mobility didn't have a great series, but Smoothie was definitely the problem in the bot lane, which is why he's going to get my dud of the series. He has not been good for Evil Geniuses this split. In fact, he's been replacement worthy, in my opinion. If he's not going to play well, if he's not going to coordinate and get this team to play at a high level macro-wise, then what's the point of having him on this team? He just has not been good enough to justify that NACL spot, in my opinion, and that's shown off here. I think he's not the only one. The other veterans also didn't play well. Ryoma just kind of got outplayed in this series by Balulu, which, Balulu is a good player. I'm not going to say that that's entirely shocking, but Ryoma needs to step up for this team in order to win games. We've seen that over the last couple of weeks. And Shaden has really just fallen off of a cliff as a jungler. He was so good at the beginning of the season. Obviously, he was awesome last year for Cloud9, one of the most mechanically talented junglers we have in North America, full stop, period, and it's just not been able to come together. These plays that he's making towards the back half of the year have almost exclusively been negative. It feels like this team is completely mental boomed at this point, and that is a problem for a team that has the talent to be able to go toe-to-toe with anyone. They just have not been able to do it. Support, mid, jungle, these positions have to step up in order for this team to even remotely get to the part of the season where they should be at right now. Because generally, they are the team that has underperformed, in my opinion, by far the most in the NACL up until this point. And this loss definitely proves that. They should not be losing to Immortals. I know Immortals is looking better as of recent, but they should not be losing this series. Overall, EG definitely needs to figure some stuff out, or they're going to be an early exit from the playoffs. And then, good win for Immortals. I'm still a little concerned about how they're going to perform against teams that do actually have their shit together, unlike Evil Geniuses right now. But it's good to see some of the players that were kind of on the fringe be able to perform. If Balulu carried them to another series win, I would have been like, okay, well, we've kind of seen this formula before, but for Wixie, for ADD, for Chad to step up and have a really good series, it's just a good sign overall for this team. And obviously, with all the players and the likability, I would say, of a lot of these players, I hope that they do end up growing and they are a kind of surprise team as we get into the playoffs here. Now we get to move on to a very important day number 2 here in week number 7. Day 2 has a lot of matchups that really are going to determine quite a bit, I would say, for the seedings the rest of the season. And of course, only one day after this left to determine the rest of them, but a lot of these teams are going to be playing for the final time this year on this day. So let's go ahead and go over all the games, starting with series number 1, and it's a matchup between Immortals challengers and Dignitas challengers. And it is a 1-1 draw for both teams, and that's good for Immortals. That is definitely a positive result for this Immortals team, but Dignitas, again, picking up another 1-1 draw. This feels like just the result that they've been getting every single series for quite a while now, for a couple of weeks. Even before Spawn came in and started playing in the bot lane, it felt like this team was really drawing a lot a lot more towards the middle part of the season, and that shows in their record. 7 wins, yes, no losses, yes, but 7 draws now as well is quite a bit, and this officially knocks them out of the opportunity, I think, to get first place. Now, I could be wrong about that, but I think as long as Cloud9 gets the job done tomorrow against a CLG Faith team that they really should beat, Dignitas is in a really tough spot to be able to get that number 1 seed. But let's talk about how the series ended up going. Game number 1 goes to the side of Immortals. Really solid game coming out from them. Mostly, in my opinion, coming out from Balulu. Again, still playing here for the Academy team. They didn't have Yusui ready. They didn't really have a backup mid ready, and so Balulu's still playing, and he's still looking really good, right? You can talk about how Insanity, for how good he has been over the past couple of years, he's kind of been the weakness for this Dignitas team in 2023, or at least that's how I've been able to pinpoint it, and I think that was a little bit apparent in this series. I think you could definitely argue that Balulu was the better mid laner, especially in game number 1 where Immortals was able to take that game, but we flip over to game number 2, Dignitas really blows them out. This one is significantly less close, and a lot of the players that were playing well for Dig in game number 1 ended up playing even better in game number 2. My player of the series played well in both games. That's going to go to Diamond in the support position for Dignitas. He's been this team's best player across the year so far. I don't really think it's all that disputable. I want to talk about the bot lane as a whole, because Spawn, I think, also was really good in this series, but you got to talk about Diamond first, because he really is carrying a lot of the advantages that this team is able to generate. Even the Pike game in game number 1 was really solid. He was keeping Dignitas in that game. I think you can make a really solid argument he was the best player on Dig in game 1. And then that Thresh game in game 2, I mean, those hooks were absolutely devastating, very difficult to deal with. I honestly just think that he is the most talented player on Dignitas right now, and it's not particularly close. I talked about earlier on in the season how it felt like, bot versus mid jungle, one of them would always do well in one series and the other would do poorly. It really does feel like the bot lane has gotten significantly more stable in the recent weeks, and a lot of that is Diamond stepping up to become one of the better supports in the entire region again. But it's not just Diamond in the bot lane that's making it look good. Spawn has been really good in the NACL since coming back down. That is no surprise to me, someone who was really high on him in Academy last year. He was arguably the best AD carry outside of Yon in Academy last year, and I think that showed a little bit when he came back here and really started to dominate in the 2v2s. I always said it about Spawn at the LCS level. What really happened for him was he was put in a position where he was expected to win lane early, which is not his strength, but also he lost his confidence, and confidence is a really big part of playing League. We heard it talked about on the dive this past week. When you're feeling good, when you're feeling like you're comfortable making the plays, you're going to go for them, and they're going to work out a lot more often. But when you second guess yourself, when you have that, question mark in your mind because of either public opinion or your own criticism, it just makes a lot of those plays a lot harder. It's good to see Spawn get back into an environment where he feels a lot more comfortable, and he's performing well again. I would say Diamond and Spawn definitely the standouts. I thought Hoon was also really good in that game too on the Gnar. I think Hoon's actually been very pleasantly positive for Dignitas overall. I would argue that, XU, Hoon, pretty solid top side over there for Dignitas, but the bot lane has definitely been the driving force. As for Immortals on the other side, good and bad. Like I said, Balulu's still looking good, but I'm not exactly sure that's something that's going to be able to translate into the playoffs, because I'm not sure that he's going to be playing for this team in the playoffs. I think Yasui's going to be able to take over in the mid lane by then, and so you're really relying a lot on the other players on this team. Bot lane wasn't particularly great. They weren't awful. They certainly weren't the problem, but top side was a little bit of an issue here. Chad's going to get my dud of the series. He's gotten quite a few of these in the NACL this split. I'm just not really that high on Chad. I'm not high on what I've seen from him. He's a really cool dude, and I love him as a personality, but it's just, the gameplay hasn't exactly been there in 2023 for me, and I think this series was a good example of that. I don't think it was just him. I thought ADD, I just praised him a lot in their first series on day number 1. Had a pretty poor series here on day number 2. Definitely got outclassed by Hoon in that game 2. A very, very strong game 2, but Immortals is generally this team that I think looks good right now, and their record's honestly not all that bad. 3-8-3. It could be way worse. I mean, that's a lot of game wins this season, but I'm worried about how that's going to translate into playoffs now that you're losing your best player in Balulu, or I'm assuming you're losing your best player in Balulu. This team's going to need to find a replacement for his level, and I'm just not sure who that's going to be. Wixie's had his moments, but it's not been consistent. I think ADD has had some good games, but it's not been consistent. Yasui's a good player, but he hasn't really been playing with this team long. It's going to be interesting to see what this Immortals team looks like, because I'm definitely starting to get a little bit concerned with what's going to happen once their best player leaves. But for Dignitas, on the other side, this team's good. And unfortunately, that's as far as I can go for Dig. I think a lot of people want to put them as one of the best teams in the NACL. I don't know where I'm at with them, right? I don't think that they are that much ahead of teams in 3rd or 4th or 5th. they're solid, but this team has shown an inconsistency to be able to put teams away, even in games where they just are better. Like, they should have won game 1 here. There really is no excuse for that. They should not be dropping games to a team like Immortals, but they have been doing that all year long. I think this team is solid, but there is a real chance that we're looking at a Dignitas team that is kind of upsettable once we get into the playoff format. And then moving on to our second series of day number 2, and it's a great series. Really, really fun games between these two teams. We had TSM Challengers taking on FlyFam, and both of these teams really showed up and performed well on this day. Game number 1 especially, an absolute bloodbath that went back and forth, with FlyFam eventually being able to pick up a very rare win for them, only their 3rd win of the season here, and a nice comeback win in game number 1. Game 2, definitely a little bit more subdued, a little bit more normal for TSM, being able to pick up the win there and splitting 1-1, but overall, I would say good series from FlyFam in particular. I want to talk about them second. I know I kind of led that in a little bit weird, but let's talk about TSM first, because I do think that they, generally speaking, were the better team in the series. They had control of game number 1, though they didn't do a very good job executing on that. They had a lot of gold, but they just weren't really able to do anything with it. And I want to give a big shout out very quickly to Hyper on the side of FlyFam. I know I was a little bit critical of him in the previous series, but I did talk about how I thought he was an upgrade to basically everybody else that had been playing in that jungle position for FlyFam over the course of the year so far, and that definitely proved itself true in this series. He had a great ending to game number 1. He was actually really good in this series in general, but I would argue he was definitely the player of the game in their game 1 win. But talking about TSM, we're going to stay in the jungle position because Svenskeren, like, where has this been over the course of this split so far? I've been very critical of Svenskeren. I think he's genuinely been one of the worst junglers, one of the worst players in the NACL this split so far, and this performance does not back that up at all. Easily the best that he has looked in 2023 so far against this FlyFam team. He goes off for 15 kills in this series. A fantastic game number 1 where they really should have won, and then a great job corralling the game and generating a large lead for TSM that they're able to just kind of finish out pretty quickly in game number 2. I should also note that TSM Challengers does have a roster change. As we all know, Wild Turtle is now up on the LCS stage, which means that Neo, the LCS AD carry, is down here on the NACL team. Didn't really feel that different. Neo played pretty okay, but Wild Turtle been playing pretty okay. You know, they were both relatively kind of meh players in the NACL, and so not really a giant change. I think Neo might actually give this team a little bit more upside when it comes to winning in the late game, but overall, really good series from Svenskeren. He was not the only one. Want to give a big shout out to Doxa, a really good game 1 and 2 from him. When that jungle mid is working, TSM is a very dangerous team. We've talked about that on the channel before. It really felt like those two are so ridiculously inconsistent for TSM that when they perform, this team can beat a lot of teams that are above them in the standings, but it's just not very often that both of them perform well in any given series, especially over the course of 2023 so far. So to see them both playing well against FlyFam is a good sign. And then Hanser. Hanser's been ridiculously consistent for TSM. We can talk about how this jungle mid hasn't exactly lived up to expectations so far this year, but Hanser absolutely has. It's hard to say anything other than positive things about how Hanser has played in 2023. I quite frankly, he's proven that I think if he wanted to get another LCS spot, like, a team would not feel bad about giving a spot to Hanser at this point. That's all I'll say about that. So top side of the map, definitely looking good. Neo having some good moments, getting caught a little bit too much. I would say some aggression coming out from Neo, but that's good to see. At least he's trying to make plays, him and Dragcube. Well, it'll take some time to develop that synergy, but I don't think they're going to be a bad bot lane at all. Then on the side of FlyFam, I actually think they looked okay here. I do have to unfortunately give one of their players dud of the series. I'm going to give it to Lunacia, but I feel really bad giving it to Lunacia because I actually think he played relatively well, especially towards the back half of game number 1. It's just, I think all 10 players genuinely played well in this series. There was not one player that I was like, wow, they definitely were like holding their team back. There was really no one like that across both teams in the series, so I'm just gonna give it to Lunacia because it felt like he had the worst individual game, which was the game 2 there for FlyFam. But overall, I would say everybody performed well, especially in that game number 1. What a bloodbath. What a fun game. Already gave a lot of credit to Hyper. I thought Hyper was really, really good in that game, but Blaze had some really good moments, definitely some good engages. I thought Instinct looked okay in some of those moments that, you know, going up against his former team, the team that he led to playoffs last year. And then, of course, Sword, obviously also a former TSM member, so, you know, Hyper in that same vein, also a former TSM member, so a lot of players on here with a little bit of revenge probably on their mind. It was probably good on them to be able to pick up that win in game number 1, but Overall, for both teams, FlyFam's going to be incredibly happy to be able to pick up a W here. They really haven't gotten a lot of these over the course of the season so far, so they've got to be excited to be able to pick up one. I know TSM Challengers isn't exactly like a top team in the league, but they're a Challengers team. They're not a provisional amateur team, so for FlyFam to be able to pick up their third win of the season here, I think is going to be a really good sign. And then for TSM, definitely some question marks. I don't think that this team really is a threat at the top of the standings, but I do think that there are worse teams out there in the NACL. Them being able to, kind of look like the better team, I would say, in both games, for a majority of both games, is a good sign. And Sven and Doxa, when they are playing well, this is a team that genuinely can compete with some of the teams that are above them. It's just going to be about the consistency. It's always been about the consistency with this team. And then moving on to our third series of the day here. It's definitely an intriguing one. Two teams I really wanted to see face off against each other. We had Golden Guardians Challengers taking on FlyQuest Challengers. And FlyQuest picks up the 2-0 win. Not a single win in this series for Golden Guardians, who felt like they really had been on a nice hot streak as of recently. It felt like bot lane finally started to figure it out. Topside felt a lot more concrete than they did earlier on in the season, but FlyQuest has their full roster now, and they are a team to be worried about if you are in the NACL. I know a lot of other people have already done deep dives into why this FlyQuest team is doing a lot better than they were earlier on in the season, but getting Winsome back is obviously huge. Getting Masu off of Ping and in the building is absolutely ginormous with how good he has been, but just generally, it feels like the atmosphere surrounding this team has upgraded so much in the last few weeks that this team has become incredibly dangerous as we move further on into the season. Let's go ahead and talk about it. My player of the series here is going to go to Spirax in the mid lane. Now, I've been both positive and negative on Spirax across this channel's history, talking about, NA Academy and now the NACL. I was very positive on Spirax in 2022. Very much loved the way he was able to play on this FlyQuest team. It felt like he got better every single game, and he was a big pick for me to break out in the year of 2023 in the preseason, but it just hasn't happened so far. He's actually had a relatively passive year, I would say, overall. Mastu has been a huge point of positivity, I would say, overall for this FlyQuest team. I think Philip in recent weeks has really stepped it up. Spirax kind of feels like the forgotten man out of these laners on FlyQuest, but not so much in this series. He was really good against Golden Guardians and against another mid laner who I think really has had a good year in Young so far on Golden Guardians. So to see Spirax step it up, really play well in this one, both in Game 1 and in Game 2, really good sign. He's my player of the series, but he's followed very closely by Winsome in that support position. Really good series coming out from Winsome. Love the way that he's been playing ever since he came back here to the NACL, obviously. He was pretty solid in, the LCS, but it's hard to really isolate his performance away from Prince, who was just so good in the LCS, and it's really difficult to know whether or not Winsome's laning prowess is able to be repeatable, maybe in a different circumstance, but we're kind of seeing a different circumstance. He goes from maybe the most talented AD carry in the LCS to maybe the most talented AD carry in the NACL, so definitely a positive for Winsome, but he continues to perform. He continues to be a great engager. He continues to be great in lane. He just does everything that you would want. One of the best supports in the entire region, and I don't think that's really much up for debate anymore. The other player on the side of FlyQuest that I really want to shout out for having a good series is actually Yuji in the jungle. Very similar to Spirax. I was very high on Yuji going into the year because of that 2022 season, but it just doesn't feel like those two had really reached their potential up until this point, but a really good series coming out from this jungle mid duo. Yuji definitely a part of that. He's probably been the weakest member of this FlyQuest Challengers roster over the course of 2023 so far. It's good to see him have a really good series where he just out jungles a jungler who was actually kind of on his A game in this one in Rosethorn. I thought Rosethorn was really solid for Golden Guardians. Maybe not perfect, but I certainly don't think he was the problem. He's been getting better week after week, and it just felt like Yuji was ready for that, and honestly just came out to outperform, and that definitely happened. Those are the three players I want to shout out on the side of FlyQuest, but I mean, Masu is also incredibly good, so it's hard to really sit here and say that this team has a lot of flaws. A really strong 2-0 from them. And then on Golden Guardians side, not really what you wanted to see. You probably wanted to see them take at least one game in this series. Unfortunately, unable to do that. My dud of the series is going to go to Young in the mid lane. I really like Young as a player, but it does feel that he has maybe dropped off a bit in the second half of the split. It really has been like major drop off, I would say. Certainly some games where he's still been positive. Most of the games he's been positive for Golden Guardians, but he was the driving force for this team for a majority of the first half of the season, in my opinion, and it's just not really been the case in the second half. I would say that, Rosethorn in particular has really stepped up in the jungle, but Array and Prismal have really become the dominant force for Golden Guardians. It wasn't enough in this series because they were going into one of the scarier bot lanes in the NACL, but Young definitely didn't have a great series. It felt like he kind of just got outplayed by Spirax, and he's going to get my dud of the series for it. The other player that I got to shout out is Concept. Not a very good game 2 coming out from Concept. He's been a lot better. I really have to say that, because in 2022, he looked like a player that did not deserve to be in Academy. He gets another shot here on Golden Guardians in 2023, and the year starts off just as bad. It feels like he's pulling out these crazy pocket picks that, he's been able to pull out for the past year, but none of them are really working at that level. He goes to a little bit more meta as we go throughout the season. It really felt like he calmed down on the top side, allowed the bot side of the map to really take over and become the positives instead of trying to play the hero game, but I'm not going to sit here and expect Concept to be a top laner in the NACL. It's just not something he's ever really shown the ability to do at that level. Still think he's a solid player, just maybe not one of the best in the entire league. So solo laner's kind of letting Golden Guardians down in this one. Rosethorn stepped up. I thought he was probably the best player on Golden Guardians in the series. Unfortunately, Yuji just played a tad bit better, and obviously the bot lane for FlyQuest was a huge positive. So overall for GG, you're going to feel bad about this loss, I would say, but it could theoretically be worse. At least you're losing to a team that very much feels like it's on the rise. One of the more dangerous teams, I would say, in the NACL in terms of momentum right now. So you're definitely going to at least feel that, but you would have liked to have picked up a pretty big win as we jump into, playoff time. And then on the side of FlyQuest, I mean, this team is absolutely rolling right now. Masu's playing awesome. Spirax and Yuji look like they're getting on the right track. Winsome looks like he's playing really well. Philip is playing better than he had at the beginning of the year. This team is very, very scary and dangerous right now. There is a real legit chance that this is one of the best teams in the NACL, like a top 2, top 3, top 4 team in the NACL, and I wouldn't really be all that surprised. They are playing at a really high level right now, and I'm hoping that they're going to be able to keep it up. And then moving on to our 4th series of day number 2 here. A battle between two teams that are very close in the standings, and quite frankly, maybe close in skill level as well. We had Evil Geniuses Challengers taking on AOE Gold, and it's a 1-1 draw here. Two teams that have really failed to separate themselves, I would say, from each other in the standings up until this point, coming to a 1-1 draw, and I think that is definitely in favor of a team like AOE. Not only are they already ahead a bit when it comes to the standings and the game record, but this is a team that I think, perception-wise, should be happy to be able to pick up a win against a Challengers team like Evil Geniuses. So, good for AOE. Solid win here. We'll get to EG in a bit on some of the things that I think might be going wrong for this team and why I'm definitely concerned with what they're going to be once we get to playoff time. But talking about AOE in a general sense, this team is really solid. I know they're not going to be this big, crazy team that's going to surprise a ton of teams in the playoffs, because I really don't believe that they're going to be that, but this is a team that does have some good players on it, and they're going to be able to take a game or two off of basically anybody that they play once we get to playoff time. My player of the series here is going to go to Winnie in the jungle. I've been pretty critical, I would say, of Winnie over the course of the season so far. I've liked him in previous seasons, but this year for AoE, it just didn't feel like it was clicking in that same way. It very much felt like it was either top or mid winning the game. Sometimes, I guess, bot lane would step in. Lynx in particular would have some solid games. We talked about Skytech earlier this week. It never really felt like Winnie was the focal point for AoE. He was kind of the one that was left behind, in my opinion, when it came to that kind of stuff. But really good series coming out from him. We're talking about this a lot, and I hate to say this, but a lot of the junglers that have gone up against Shaden in recent weeks have done really, really well for themselves in that series, and Winnie is certainly no exception to that rule. A really good series coming out from him, both in Game 1 and in Game 2. Obviously, a little bit more in Game number 1, but I still think his Game 2 was solid, and I think Winnie as a player probably gets underrated by me just because he hasn't been the same kind of standout that some of the other players on AoE have. He hasn't necessarily been a problem either. There are very few games this year that Winnie has lost for his team in the jungle matchup that he's gotten so far behind that they've become difficult. He just isn't necessarily the same carry kind of jungler that I think we have on some of the top teams in the league. But Winnie's very solid, and another good game from him. Other players on AoE, the two carry roles definitely jump out. Lynx had a really good series here. He had another one earlier on in the week, so that's good for him. Dark Wings with another solid game. He's had a lot of those in a row. He was in contention. I don't actually remember. He might have won it, but he was certainly in contention for my player of the week last week in the entirety of the NACL. You know, he's also been really solid, I would say, over the past few weeks as well. So Darkwing's kind of taken that step up like I hoped he would. I've always been a big fan of Darkwings, as we know, on this channel, especially going back to last year. But, you know, those three players, jungle, mid, ADC, definitely, in my opinion, being the three standout members for AoE in the series. It's good. You know, I hate to say this, but it's good not to see Gamsu on that list, if only just because it feels like Gamsu has always been kind of the rock in the top lane. It's really good to see other members of this team step up and perform in some of their wins. I was really worried that this team wasn't going to get a lot of good performances unless their solo laners really started to pop off, but to see Gamsu have a little bit of an up and down series, he was still really solid and definitely the better top laner in this series. But, you know, to see him not exactly be the superstar up in the top lane in AoE, still able to take the win here, I just think it's a really good sign overall, and the rest of the team really is doing well. As for Evil Geniuses on the other side, yikes. I'm not feeling good about this team, man. I had this team very highly rated for so long this season because it felt like if only they had their roster, if only they had their roster. And then Ryoma comes in and they look a lot better. Shaden has some weeks where he looks amazing. Ryoma really is playing good League of Legends right now, but everything is just not clicking at the same time. Yes, I agree. Ryoma is still playing very good League of Legends. He wasn't very good earlier in the week, but this was a very good series from him, especially in their Game 2 win. I thought Ryoma was the best player on Evil Geniuses here. Mobility is a close second. I thought he had a pretty solid series here going into AoE. Again, especially in that game number 2, but the problems that Evil Geniuses have continue to pop up, and these are things that are definitely stickable problems, and it's the top side of the map. We've talked a bit about Shaden and his inconsistency. He was so good to start the year, and we know how talented he can be from his Cloud9 days last year, but it just feels like as this team has slowly fallen down the standings, Shaden as a player has taken a bit of a step back. This was somebody who I was looking at for an LCS promotion at some point mid-year that is nowhere on the cards anymore with how he has played over the second half of the NACL split, in my opinion. But in this series in particular, my dud of the series is going to go to Soul in the top lane. He's been kind of, on the brink of this for a couple of series in a row now. It's always been like, oh, Shaden's been really bad, he gets dud of the series, or oh, Smoothie's really bad, he gets dud of the series. But Soul is always like the second guy that's always not performing, but just not like the active worst player on the team. Well, in this one, I just couldn't give it to anybody else. Soul's had a lot of bad series back to back to back for me. And I'm not going to say he's a big reason why Evil Geniuses isn't playing well, but I think he's a casualty of Evil Geniuses not playing well, right? It really does feel like as this team continues to slip down in the standings, as they lose another Game 1 to AoE, the mentality and the confidence of a lot of the players on this team continues to suffer, and I think that was definitely the case here for Soul. It's been the case for Shaden, or at least that's what I can assume, and it's just never something you want to see out of such a young team with so much promise and potential. I don't think that the rest of spring is going to be great for Evil Geniuses, really, at this point. I guess I'm just hoping that this team can rebound, the kind of mentality that they want to have. Maybe they actually get their bot laner in for summer, and then we can, push for potentially a better result in the next split, but this split genuinely does feel kind of doomed for this Evil Geniuses team. And then for AoE, this is actually a pretty solid week from them, and it's another pretty solid week in a row. Feels like they've had a lot of really good series back to back to back. None of them have been like explicitly like fantastic. They haven't dominated any team maybe other than some of the bottom teams. They're not like upsetting a lot of the top teams in 2-0s, but at the very least they're holding their own against teams that have proven themselves to at the very least be competent, and that is a very good sign. This AoE team is certainly not a pushover like they were near the beginning of the year. This team is genuinely, at least at the very least, solid, and I think they're going to give a tough run to basically anybody that they run into in the playoffs. And now we jump into series number 5 here on day number 2. And this one really does have some playoff implications. Two top teams here in the NACL, in my opinion. We have CLG Challengers taking on Cincinnati Fear. Very intriguing matchup. Two teams that I think are really on the up and up. Two of the scariest teams in the NACL. There really is no other way about it. I know both haven't exactly performed every single series in the year so far, but I think comparatively, like both of these teams could theoretically take the entire trophy, and that's what makes this matchup so interesting. Fear is able to take Game 1, CLG is able to take Game 2 in a pretty big blowout, and that's kind of the story of this, right? Is that Fear looked really solid in Game number 1, everybody kind of performing together on the same page, a really interesting draft, and then Game 2, it all kind of falls apart. CLG does a really good job taking advantage of some of the weaknesses that Fear show, and you basically from 10, 11, 12 minutes into the game onwards, that game is over. So let's go ahead and talk about it. Let's start off with the CLG side because I do think that they were a bit more consistent across both games, and so probably a little bit easier to talk about. They also have the player of the series here for me, and that player of the series is going to go to Jenkins in the top lane. I haven't really talked a lot about Jenkins across the year so far. I've been very focused on Copy, obviously, for CLG Challengers. He's been really good. Meech and Breezy have had some really good games. Kevy, I think, has really proved a lot of people wrong. Jenkins hasn't come up in the conversation all that much. He's mostly been on weak side, but he does get one of his signature picks here in game number 2 in the Rumble, and he does a really good job popping off on it. A really good game number 2, and probably the more dominant of any of the games that happened here. Jenkins, one of those players that does have the potential to kind of show up in one of those games and just kind of dominate from that point onwards, really any time. Maybe not someone who's going to do it super consistently, especially on just quote-unquote meta picks, things that are more tanky, things that are a little bit more passive, but when he does get his Rumble, when he does get his Kennen, things like that that he's known for in the past, he can still pop off. He can still be one of the scarier top laners in the league to go against, and I think he showed that off in this series. Good series from Jenkins. Honestly, probably his best game of the split here in game number 2 on that Rumble, but he was far from the only player on CLG to perform well in this series. I do want to give a nice shout out to Kevy in the jungle, who I think is still kind of underrated by the community as a whole. I know there are a lot of good junglers in the NACL, but Kevy is absolutely one of them. It feels like every time I bring him up, people are a little bit more dismissive of his ability to be like a top jungler in the NACL, and I just don't really understand why. He's been incredibly solid, I would say, over the course of the year. Yes, I think Copy has definitely been like the dominant force of that jungle mid duo, but they work together super well, and I do think that they have both made each other better as players, and so I really do like what Kevy was able to do, and especially in this series, in this game number 2, where he just obliterated Perry. I mean, Perry was nothing in game number 2. No offense, he had a really good game 1. We'll get to that in a bit, but that game number 2 was just kind of brutal for Fear all around, and Kevy did a really good job being able to generate that lead early. And then Meech was the other player I wanted to give a nice shout out to. He's just so mechanically talented, it's kind of insane. Like, his laning isn't always consistent, but when it works, it really, really works. And obviously, we know how I feel about Breezy on this channel. They can win 2v2 quite frequently, but you let this guy get into the mid game, into the late game, he's going to be very scary. And I think Meech, I think Kevy, I think Jenkins, those are the 3 CLG players that really stood out to me as like the big carries here. Notably, no Copy, and I said that earlier on in the week as well. That's a good thing for CLG in my opinion. It's not that he played bad. I certainly don't think he had a bad couple of games. I just think that it's a really good sign that this team can prove to win games and win them confidently against a good team, a very good team like Fear, without the need for their mid laner to completely dominate and pop off, somebody who's been in the MVP conversation basically all split long, and I think that's genuinely a really, really good sign for CLG. So solid series overall from them. As for Fear, on the other side, it's a tale of 2 games for them, definitely. A nice win in game number 1. It felt like Perry was awesome. It felt like the whole team was awesome, but Perry definitely would have been my player of the game in that first one on the Sedge 1. He's setting up plays for basically everybody on the team. Really good job from him. He had a great week, in my opinion, except for game number 2, because game number 2, everything fell apart. Not only was, jungle a disaster early on, it felt like top lane was a disaster in the mid game. Mid lane, bot lane, everybody was kind of losing. Nobody was really in a decent spot. Obviously, nobody lost, like, ridiculously hard, and there were some lanes that were relatively viable. Like, they kept up in CS until the rest of the map started to collapse in, but you hit a point pretty early on in the game where it just felt kind of unwinnable for Fear, and that's unfortunate. But some of those games are just going to happen. I'm glad they're getting them out of the way now instead of next week in the playoffs. It's good to see this team at least, feeling at least a little bit confident in themselves. But my dud of the series, unfortunately, has to go to a member of Fear because of that game number 2. I'm going to give it to Faisal just because, honestly, his lane opponent got fed. That was really the only differentiator that I could find between top lane, mid lane, bot lane, jungle. Like, everybody was kind of bad in game number 2, and everybody was kind of good in game number 1. You could realistically give this to any of the 5 members, I should say, on Fear in this game, and I don't think there's going to be a lot that would be disputable from that. This team, generally speaking, was solid in one game and not so solid in the other. There are things to build off of here. Obviously, I think Perry, when he wins, looks phenomenal as a jungler. Shochi had another solid week. The Yone game was really, really good. I think Manui and Trevor are solid as a duo. Maybe not, like, dominant in that same way that, like, the top bot lanes in the league are dominant, but they're certainly not a liability by any stretch. And Faisal, I think this really was the only time this year where it ever felt like he was kind of getting outplayed by the enemy top laner. I think for the most part, Fear is going to be fine. I'm not really worried about this team. I think they're going to show a lot more come playoff time. They had a really rough stretch to end the season, and I honestly think they did relatively well with it. Trading 1-1 in a lot of these series is going to be positive against some of the best teams in the league, and it should give them at least a little bit of confidence heading into that playoff stage. And then for CLG on the other side, they're also just a great team. There are a lot of really good teams in the NACL right now, but it feels like CLG is on a hot streak, very similar to that FlyQuest team. I'm not necessarily going to say they have the same kind of upside, but this team is certainly not going to be an easy outcome playoff time in a best of 5. I certainly wouldn't want to have to run into them, and I think that's the same case for a lot of other teams. They showed why in this series they are quite feared by the rest of the teams in the league, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. And then moving on to our final series of day number 2 here. And it's another 2 teams that are relatively similar in terms of skill level and in terms of standings. We had Team Liquid Challengers taking on 100 Thieves Challengers, an intriguing contest that matters a lot for both of these teams. 100 Thieves in particular, they need to be able to pick up a 2-0 win in order to keep their hopes of getting top 2 alive, and that's just not able to happen here. 100 Thieves ends up splitting 1-1. Team Liquid ends up taking that first game, and honestly, I can't say that I'm surprised. 100 Thieves is kind of on the downswing in terms of what they've been able to perform at recently. Some of of the players are getting exposed just a tad bit more than they had been in recent weeks, and I think a lot of other teams that they've been playing have really been stepping up. Case in point, Team Liquid, who I think has been playing a lot better as of recent. They're definitely better than their record would indicate at the moment, and that game one definitely showed that off. My player of the series is going to go to APA, legitimately an MVP candidate in the NACL this split. He really has been fantastic for this Team Liquid team. He's been incredibly consistent. He's been a huge positive for them. He's been someone that they can play through. He's been a scaler that can get to that late game. Whatever you really need APA to do, he can do, and he's been able to do it at a high level all year long. He was so much better than Pretty in this series. We'll get to Pretty because I'm starting to get a little bit out on him as the mid laner here for 100 Thieves, but APA was awesome, and there's really just not a lot that I can say about him that I haven't already said. I've been very high on him over the course of the year so far. That's going to continue. Another really good series coming out from him. But the other player, again, that I want to give a big shout out to, Arrow on the side of Team Liquid Challengers. He got player of the series earlier in the week on day number 1. He's going to get a nice shout out here in series number 2 as well. He's been kind of up and down, like I said. Him and, Kim Down have been a little bit up and down, I would say, on opposite scales, which we'll get to in a bit when we talk about Kim Down, but kind of on opposite scales. But Arrow's in good form right now, and I would say that he definitely showed that off in week number 7. I would say, generally speaking, he was better than Unforgiven in this series, which I know that there are a lot of Unforgiven haters out there. I'm still really high on him as a player. I do think that his play has dipped a tad bit in the second half of the split, but generally speaking, I think the bot lane is still incredibly strong on the side of 100 Thieves, which makes it even more impressive for Arrow to come out and look really good in a lot of these team fights. And for Team Liquid just in general, you're really hoping that he can step it up. Obviously, that veteran presence is going to be very crucial towards this team's playoff hopes and playoff dreams, and so, for him to be able to come out in the last week of the season here and perform at such a high level, it's definitely a confidence booster for this Team Liquid team that desperately needed it. To see the two carry roles both play particularly well here, I think is definitely good, but that doesn't absolve the rest of this team from some problems. We'll talk quickly about 100 Thieves roster decision, because that's going to lead me into a conversation, of course. Sniper, like I said earlier this week, is going to take some time off. He's not going to be playing the rest of the split, as far as I'm aware. I don't know if he's going to be playing next split. I'm not going to try and get into the reason. I don't know what the reason is, and, nor do I need to know, nor do any of us need to know, right? If he needs to take time off, let him take time off. With everything that's going on in the community right now, all the stories about mental health not being upheld, by certain organizations, it's good to see, Sniper actually be given the time that he needs to take off at the moment. But Tenacity, because they didn't have a sub, Tenacity is going to be filling in and playing top lane in this series, and that was a problem for Bradley, who was not ready to go into one of the better top laners that the NACL and the Academy League has ever seen in Tenacity. He didn't have a particularly good series. I think that he definitely showed some flaws in the top lane, especially in that game number 2 that they ended up losing. And the other player that honestly I was not impressed at all with over the course of the week was honestly Kim Down in the support position. I've honestly been pretty high on Kim Down over the course of the year. He definitely outplayed a lot of my expectations for him going into the year. I didn't love his tape before 2023, but I actually think his laning stats this year have been pretty solid, and for the most part, he was the more consistent member of the bot lane duo. But like I said, that was when Arrow was kind of struggling. It feels like the opposite's happening now. Arrow's starting to play well, even in the early 2v2s, and Kim Down's really struggling to kind of separate himself from the pack of really good supports in the NACL. Hopefully those two players can step up, because I don't think either really had a great series here, but generally speaking, APA, Arrow, those are the two players that really do need to play well, and I think they did in this series. As for 100 Thieves, they still were able to take game number 2. It was a nice bounce back from them. At least they were able to take a game, but there are definitely some problems with this team. Let's talk about the positives first. Destiny is still really good. It's hard not to look at this bot lane and see Unforgiven as the big star, but truthfully, Destiny has been the better player over the course of the year so far. You can talk about Unforgiven kind of falling off a little bit in the second half. I still think his mechanics are definitely there, and I imagine he'll be there for playoffs, but Destiny over the course of the year has maybe been the best player in the NACL. You can certainly make the argument for that, and this was another series where it felt like support gap was absolutely real in that game number 2. Really solid showing from him. And then Tenacity. I mean, it's just not fair. Tenacity is better than Bradley, and that's quite clear. I know Bradley's been getting some rumors of some call-ups, or at least some teams are interested, but Tenacity's a really good player. He's incredibly mechanically talented, and he's someone that can step in and fill in for that role basically immediately, and that was shown off here in that game number 2 where he looked really, really solid. The other players, though, I would say all 3 of the other players on 100 Thieves underperforming. My dud of the series is going to go to Yukino in the jungle. I already talked about this earlier on in the week, but Yukino has been the weak link for this 100 Thieves team, and I'm really just hoping that he's going to be able to turn it around as we get into playoffs here. This jungle mid in general, I think, has pretty heavily underperformed for 100 Thieves, especially over the last few weeks. And And I think that was never more apparent than in this series where, Mir, a jungler who's really been struggling recently, APA, obviously a very good mid laner, they were really able to pick apart that jungle mid duo and create a lot of problems for 100 Thieves. Unforgiven also not really performing up to expectations. I don't have as many worries about him. I'm sure that when the games matter more, he's going to be able to get his head locked in. He's also got a really good lane partner. They're still going to be one of the more dangerous lanes to play against in the playoffs. I'm not super worried about that. But the jungle mid duo, I am worried about. If this jungle mid continues to be a problem, this could be an early exit kind of team, a team that exits at least a lot earlier than maybe they hope to or anticipate to in the playoffs. They have a lot of talent, but it's all just going to be about the consistency and whether or not the weak links can live up to the same hype as maybe some of the top players on the team are living up to right now. And then for Team Liquid, hyper-consistent series, hyper-consistent team. This team is going to be a threat in the playoffs, basically no matter who they're going against. They're kind of in the middle of the standings, which raises kind of an interesting conundrum. They're probably going to have to play one of the better teams in the second round if they even end up making it through the first round, because they're going to have one of the tougher first round opponents from all the teams that are kind of around their skill level. But if any team is able to upset some other better team, Team Liquid is absolutely the organization to be able to do that. This is an org that has only found success in the playoffs over the last few years, even when they've struggled a little bit in the regular season. I doubt that this year is going to be any major exception. I thought they were solid in the series, and they've been really solid over the last few weeks. I really like how their players, specifically their mid lane, is playing right now, and I'm just really hoping that APA can show that it's not a flash in the pan, that he genuinely is one of the best mid laners in the NACL come playoff time. But that's going to bring us now, after day number 2, to our third and final day here in the NACL regular season. Now, that doesn't mean it's the last thing that we're going to cover on this channel, because, of course, the opportunity for tiebreaker games absolutely exists here in the NACL, but we're going to be covering this as the final full day of regular season coverage in the spring split of the NACL. So I'm excited to get into it. Let's go ahead and jump into our first series. A little bit of a blowout on paper, and you know what? It definitely lived up to that standard. We had Cloud9 challengers taking on CLG Faith, maybe the best team in the league, taking on probably the worst team in the league, and C9 definitely gets the job done. A strong 2-0 from them. They dominated both games, as they absolutely should have, mind you. This should never have been remotely close, and luckily for C9, it wasn't. It felt like everybody on the team was actively playing at a pretty high level, but most notably, I should say, the top side of the map. I know a lot of people are going to complain about how the top side of the map has played for them this year. I would say that obviously mid lane was a big positive spot for them, especially early on with Eminus dominating the solo kill leaderboard and Diplex coming in being really good as well. And then Lost and Zazel have certainly had their moments. But Tomio's been fantastic over the course of the split, and I think Fake God has really, really quietly been one of the better top laners in the entirety of the NACL, mostly just because he plays with 4 other really good players. But Fake God's going to get my player of the series here. He was awesome in both games. It's very rare for this team to rely on him to be able to carry. It's very rare for this team to have him lead in kills, but he did it in both games, and he looked really good doing it. Top lane, obviously not a super strong point of the map for CLG Faith. Really hasn't been at all at any point this year, I should say, but Fake God, one of those players that can really take advantage of a lot of the weaknesses that other teams are going to show them. I've always been a lot higher on him as a player. I've always been a lot, generally speaking, a lot more comfortable with him as a player. I think he has proven that he is really, really good. Probably too good for this level of play. Unfortunately, he's one of those players that is probably too good for NACL, is just barely not good enough to be able to compete at the LCS level, but a really solid player that I think shows off a lot of his skills in this one. The other player, obviously, Tomio, that really dominated the series. CLG Faith, NXI, really had a down split. Honestly, NXI was a player that I was excited about going into the year. Someone who has shown really good things in the past at this level, even at a higher level for FlyQuest in the LCS, but it really has not been his year. It's kind of hard to look good as a jungler on a team where, every one of your lanes is consistently losing in the 1v1 or the 2v2, but NXI at moments has just been out-jungled by worse competition than he really should be. Obviously, team environment can really affect you a lot, but he was not very good this year. I will argue that he was the best CLG Faith player in this series, but that's really not saying a whole lot as we jump into the conversation around CLG Faith here. And unfortunately, that conversation mostly just revolves around this team not being able to compete at all with the best team in the NACL, which was shown off here. Pretty much everybody, I will say, on this roster underperformed or didn't really perform at all in this series. I already talked about NXI a bit, but he was probably the best player on CLG in the series. Really the only one that was stepping up and playing well at all, even if he hasn't played all that well over the course of the entire season up until this point. But everybody else, all four of the other members, I think were definitely in contention for my dud of the series. I'm going to give it to Aaron in the bot lane. 0-10 is just not very good for an ADC, especially in a meta where an ADC carry is very, very important to have, and it's really, really hard to win games when your ADC is super far behind. Aaron had probably his worst series of the split. Obviously, I think him coming in and kind of upgrading over Sketch and Plux in that bot lane to Aaron and Sketch, I definitely think that's been a positive overall for CLG Faith. But I just don't think that kind of translated into a series where they were going up against one of the scarier bot lanes in the league and lost in Zazel. Sketch wasn't very good. He was also really bad. Town got completely outplayed in the mid lane matchup. Diplex was just way better. And then Bajani, already talked about how good Fake God was up on the top side. Bajani, unfortunately, was the one who kind of had to struggle to play into him in this series. And so overall, kind of a blowout. Really hard to give you analysis on this because it was exactly as expected, and pretty much every player in the game played as expected. The players on CLG Faith just couldn't keep up with the players on Cloud9. Not particularly surprising, but this is probably going to be a matchup that we are going to see again next week, as it very much looks like the best team in the NACL taking on the worst, and that would be 1 versus 16 when we get to the playoff time. But then moving on to our second series of the day here, and two challengers teams, but two that are kind of moving in opposite directions in my opinion. Maybe not going the way I expected it to. We had Immortals challengers taking on FlyQuest challengers, and they split 1-1. But honestly, Immortals looking really good in this series. This is honestly a big confidence booster for me when it comes to Immortals' chances come playoff time, because honestly, this is a very good FlyQuest team, and I think you can make a really solid argument that they were the more impressive team out of the two of them in this series. FlyQuest has really only been pointing up as of recent, and Immortals, honestly, sneakily has kind of been moving in a similar direction. They haven't been able to get it done in terms of 2-0s, but a lot of 1-1s against a lot of competitively good teams, and so we'll talk about them first because I actually think they're the more interesting ones to talk about in this series. My player of the series is going to be on Immortals. It's going to go to Balulu. Again, it feels almost unfair that he gets to play because he's playing in the LCS right now, but obviously he started the year in the NACL. He's going to finish it out here in the NACL, playing all those games in the mid lane. He was phenomenal in this series. A big mid gap, in my opinion, in favor of Immortals, and that was a big reason why they were able to take game one so easily. Balulu, when he is on champions that he's comfortable with, is really, really good, and honestly, I feel like he's ramped up even more over the course of the year. He was really good in Week 7 here for this team. It felt like that LCS confidence that he was able to gain by playing in that upper region or that upper league, for a week or so, really gave him the confidence to come back down here to NACL and try to style on some fools. He knew he had that position locked in the LCS, and so he came down here and he really dominated. Great week coming out from him. Definitely in the conversation for player of the week, but a fantastic series in general here from him. Definitely the best player on Immortals, in my opinion. The other players that I want to shout out, Joey and Wixie, the bot lane here coming out for Immortals. Honestly, just being the better bot lane. Like, Masu was good, and we'll get to that. He was the best player on FlyQuest, especially in their Game 2 win, but that Game 1 for Wixie and Joey, really, really good, and honestly, a very impressive performance. I would say, generally speaking, they also had a really good week. Wixie, in particular, I think showed me a lot in Week 7 that he really hadn't showed up until this point. I think you're really hoping that he's able to develop and grow. Immortals is really relying on him to be able to be a big carry for them come playoff time, especially if Balulu is not going to be playing for this team. Wixie is probably going to be the one to take up the mantle of main carry for this team, and if he's going to play like he did in Week 7, I'm not going to be nearly as worried about them going into playoff time, but obviously you're going to need that stability. The stability is offered, though, by the support in Joey, who I do think has been generally very good over the course of the year. Again, support's one of those positions that I feel is extremely stacked in the NACL right now. There are a lot of really good support players in this region, and add Joey to that list. He's been very good for a very, very long time. It feels like this guy's been playing for a decade. He might have been playing for a decade. I don't really know. I can remember him back in like 2015, 2016, kind of breaking through, and so just crazy to see that he's still playing at such a high level now for Immortals, but he's had a very good split, and he had another really good series here. Those are the main players I want to shout out on the side of Immortals, but There is one player I do have to call out because my dud of the series is going to go to ADD in the top lane. Again, I was feeling so good about ADD after their first series of the week here on day number 1, but we get all the way here to day number 3 and it's just all collapsed around him. He just didn't have a very good series. I would say neither top laner was particularly good here. Top lane was rather boring. Neither were really able to generate any large leads, especially in the games that they weren't directly winning in, like the rest of the team wasn't directly winning in. And that was the case for ADD. It just felt like his ints in game number 2 were a little bit more obvious. He just had such a bad game number 2 that for me it was the worst game of the series, and he's going to get dead of the series for it. But generally speaking, this is a positive for Immortals overall. And then for FlyQuest on the other side, this team was white hot heading into the series. To lose game number 1, it had to feel like a little bit of a downer. But obviously, nice bounce back in game number 2. You were still able to pick up a win here, 1-1. It certainly could have been worse. And against, it's not like an awful team. Immortals has definitely been trending upwards, and Balulu is a very good player, but you were hoping for a little bit more. Luckily, at least your superstar, young, prodigy bot laner Masu came in and had a really good series for you guys, because that's the player you're really building around. You could talk about SpearX, you could talk about Yuji, hell, even a player like Winsome. Philip's been good at the LCS level, but this team is going to revolve around how good Masu can be, especially once we get to the best of 3s, once we get to the best of 5s. It's all really going to be about how this bot lane performs, and luckily for FlyQuest, he was the player of the game in game number 2 here, but you're just hoping he's going to be able to keep it up. I think there were a couple players on this team that were a little bit frustrating to watch, and they were the solo laners for me. Philip was really bad in game number 1. Not that ADD was much better, but I think both top laners were a little bit disappointing in the series. And then SpearX is the other player that I want to talk about. Mid was a pretty big gap in favor of Immortals in this series, and that's just something that can't happen. We talked about how good SpearX is when he is on and when he's given resources earlier on in the week, but this is the inconsistency that I was talking about. I wanted him to be my big breakout player of 2023, but for every good game, it feels like he has another really bad one, and this was another good example of that, in my opinion. Overall, FlyQuest is still a good team, but this slightly dampens my expectations of what this team is going to be capable of moving into playoffs. I think that there still are a lot of questions for this team to answer. Obviously, getting everyone in, getting Winsome on this team has certainly increased the ceiling of this team by quite a lot, and they still are one of the more interesting teams in the entire league, but to say that they are a lock for like top 3, top 2 even, like I've seen some other people throwing around, I'm just not sure about that after the series. And then for Immortals, solid series. I still don't know where I'm going to eventually rank this team because I don't know who's going to be playing in the mid lane spot and how well they're going to do. It's going to be a very interesting proposition to try and project what's going to come out of this mid lane role, but if it's anything like what we got in this series, Immortals is going to be just fine and a big upset threat in the playoffs. Moving on to our third series of the day, though, and it's a little bit of a surprise, at least how it ended up turning out. We had TSM Challengers taking on Evil Geniuses Challengers, and TSM takes the 2-0 series win, winning both games here. Definitely a little bit surprising to me, because I thought TSM was for sure the weakest Challengers team in the league, but that title very well could go to Evil Geniuses, especially with how they played over the course of week number 7. So let's go ahead and talk about TSM to start off. They dominated both of these games. They were definitely the better team. Game number 2 was an absolute blast, by the way. TSM played a couple of these over the course of the week. Obviously, a really fun one against FlyFam on day 2. Another really fun one against EG here on day 3. They just have bangers. You can talk about whether or not that's conducive to them actually winning games, but they play these super big, bloody, high kill games where, they're in control or they're not in control and they either win or they lose, right? Very, very fun stuff to watch. It's very back and forth, and TSM's kind of a fun team because of it. There were some positives and some negatives to take away from that, but I think a lot of the positives have to do with the bot lane here for TSM. My player of the series is pretty easily going to go to Neo in the bot lane. Some people were wondering how Neo was going to be able to adjust to the NACL. Wasn't exactly killing it in the LCS before he got replaced by Wild Turtle, and obviously Turtle's got up to the LCS and done pretty good things. He's played very well for that team, but Neo coming down here has been just as, good off for it, I would say. He's been playing really well for TSM in general. Really good series from him. Pretty easy choice for player of the series. He was aggressive. He was stepping up. He was trying to make plays, especially skirmishes in the mid game. He was willing to take over games late, especially this game number 2. Impressive stuff. It's basically everything you wanted to see out of an LCS-ready ADC. I just wish you would have shown this on the LCS stage rather than here in the NACL. Obviously, different circumstances, different scenarios, but it's the aggression, it's the mentality that I really like coming out from Neo here, and I hope he's going to be able to keep it up, especially for the rest of the year. Now, he wasn't the only one who played well. Got to give a lot of credit to Dragku down in the support position as well. He's been very underratedly solid, I would say, for TSM. I didn't really have high hopes for him coming into the year. It really felt like he was going to be a little bit of a disappointment. It wasn't somebody that I was really high on when I was watching the tape from him in Oceania, so I didn't think he was going to be this big, like, dominant threat. He's kind of a veteran, pairing up with Wild Turtle. They had their ups and downs, I would say, especially when they all got here, but for the most part, they were just kind of meh. But it feels like Dragku has been a lot better as of recent. I feel like it took a little bit of time for him to get used to playing in NA. And then as soon as he got used to it, he just started playing a lot more consistent and a lot better, especially in the early 2v2s. Him and Neo hopefully can become a really solid duo. They already, quite frankly, look a little bit better than what Wild Turtle and Dragku were for most of this split. But the other player that you gotta shout out, obviously Svenskeren was good too, but I gotta shout out Hauntzer in the top lane. He's just so good for TSM, and he doesn't get any of the credit that he deserves. I know a lot of people are going to look at more, young, up-and-coming, less, veteran, less old, established top laners as, like, the big up-and-coming prospects, but Hauntzer has proven time and time again over the course of the split that he absolutely deserves to be mentioned in the conversation as one of the best top laners in the NACL, and he does it again in this series. Absolutely destroys Soul, and we'll get to that, but top lane was not a close matchup. Soul was definitely a huge problem, definitely the worst player on Evil Geniuses. And a lot of that was Hauntzer just playing really, really well. I hope that he gets another chance in the LCS. I've always liked Hauntzer as a player. He's always performed when he's been given the opportunity, and he's performing again here in the NACL. Really, really like what I've seen from him. Unfortunately, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for TSM players. My dud of the series is going to go to Doxa in the mid lane. I've been very low on Doxa since day number 1 here in the LCS. Obviously, he was an emergency replacement for everything that happened in the offseason in the mid lane, but just as a player, he wasn't someone that I was expecting to be able to come in and compete with a lot of the top mid laners here in a very deep mid lane class, if we're being entirely honest. And that's proven true. He was, even in these blowouts where TSM, game 1 was a blowout, right? Game number 2, while it wasn't a blowout, TSM still looking really good because of it, and a lot of the players coming out really strong. Doxa was not the player that came out looking strong. I would argue he was the weakest player in the series, and that was only highlighted by the fact that the rest of his team was playing so well. The fact that he was still struggling so much to be able to keep up with the EG team was definitely disappointing. I think that, you could say what you want about Ryoma, but Ryoma was definitely better than Doxa in this series. I like Ryoma a lot as a player, and I honestly thought he was fantastic in game number 2, which we'll talk about, but Doxa, unfortunately, is going to get my dud of the series, even with a 2-0 win coming out here from TSM. But on the side of Evil Geniuses, it was a little bit of a tale of 2 games. They were really solid in game number 2. I actually would say that pretty much everybody on the team in game 2 played their role, with the exception of Soul, who I thought was definitely a little bit of a hindrance. Already talked about him a bit earlier on in the week as a player that just wasn't playing all that well for Evil Geniuses, but he was probably the weakest player on the team again. He really did not have a good week, and he has not had a good last few weeks. I think Shaden obviously was bad in game 1, but everybody was bad in game 1. Everybody kind of bounced back in game 2. It really just was, which game are you talking about? Game number 1, bad EG, especially top lane. Game number 2, good EG, unfortunately without top lane. That's just kind of how I felt. And I feel bad saying that about Soul, because he had some good moments in game 2, but for the most part, he was definitely the hindrance on that team, especially in the team fight stage, where it felt like a lot of his engages just kind of lost Evil Geniuses the game. Overall, EG really might be the worst Challengers team, the worst actual Challengers team in the NACL right now, and that's just a shame. They really have no reason to be. They have good players on this team. I do think Ryoma's been playing well, but outside of that, I don't think anybody else has been consistent at all. Mobility's had some good games, but Shaden has really fallen off a cliff. Soul has not been good at all. Smoothie has not been good at all. It's just frustrating, because this is a team that absolutely should be performing better than they are right now. They just aren't. And then for TSM, they're going to be really happy about a 2-0 win, especially considering the fact that it feels like their bot lane is really getting online. Proper timing, because playoffs are right around the corner. Hopefully this team can be a little bit of an X factor come playoff time. I'm not really expecting them to be able to upset, any major team that they go against in the first round, but, crazier things have happened, and, this is a TSM team full of players who have played in high pressure scenarios. There is absolutely a world in which they shock the world and end up beating somebody they shouldn't. And then moving on to our 4th series of the day. And this one was a lot of fun to watch as well. 2 series back-to-back that I think I had a really good time watching, enjoying everything. We had Dignitas Challengers taking on AOE Gold. A top team versus a bottom team. Not something that I would usually call a very close series, but AOE versus Dig was a lot of fun. It's a 1-1 split, which is not good for Dig. Again, they are addicted to not being able to win both games. They did that 8 times this season. That is almost as much as anybody else in the league. Only Immortals has them beat in that category, mind you. Obviously, losing 0, which is still pretty great. Obviously, never losing 2 games back-to-back is a big boon for Dignitas, but not being able to win 2 in a row against some teams that you absolutely should definitely raises some question marks as well, and they've been playing questionable as of late for sure. We'll get into that, but let's talk about AoE first, because honestly, they were the better team across these 2 games, or at least that's how I ended up viewing it. I gotta give player of the series. There was only one option. Well, I'll be honest. There were 2 options, one on each team, but for me, there was only one option. My player of the series has to go to Dark Wings in the mid lane. A Herculean effort coming out from him to be able to try to pull game 2 back, but he was awesome in game number 1. Clearly the player of the game in that one, and then a beautiful performance coming out of him in game number 2. He very narrowly made this a 2-0 win for AoE, which would have been absolutely hilarious in Dignitas' last series of the year, but unfortunately, just not how the cookie crumbled, but you gotta give Dark Wings a lot of credit. Not only has he been really good over the course of this week, he was awesome last week, he's been fantastic over the second half of the split. He's really blossomed into one of the more interesting mid lane prospects in the entire region, and this is what I predicted. I said this in my preseason predictions, that Dark Wings was going to prove to everyone in 2023 that he was a mid laner that had to be taken seriously as a credible LCS threat, right? This is somebody who I think could be, considered for LCS positions in the way that he is playing at the moment. He has been a lot of fun to watch over the course of the year. He's always been one of my favorite players to watch in the NA ecosystem. I'm really glad to see him living up to that expectations. But talking about Dark Wings, I know I usually go in team order, but I just have to simply talk about the 2 best players in this series. Talked about Dark Wings on the side of AoE. Well, how did Dignitas end up winning if Dark Wings was the best player? Well, they had someone who absolutely deserved player of the series as well in Spawn on the other side. I know people don't like Spawn, but what a fantastic series overall for him. And honestly, he's been great since reintroducing himself to the NACL. He was great in Academy last year. Like I said, arguably the best AD carry, maybe outside of Yawn. But some people might even rank him higher. I would definitely consider him relatively on the same page, but he comes back into that ecosystem, hopefully gets his confidence back a little bit, plays with a team that definitely has more direction than whatever Dignitas was doing on the main roster, and he looks terrific. He's one of the best late-game team-fighting AD carries that NA has, regardless of LCS versus NACL. That's always been his strength, is his skirmishing in the mid-game and his ability to position in late-game team fights. I know that a lot of people were really, really ragging on him for his early laning phase, but honestly, the player that I compared him to the most last year, and the player that I still think kind of, matches his playstyle a bit, is Neon. And I think both of them are getting kind of criticized right now, and so it's good to see Spawn step up and have a really good showing, and really drag out a Game 2 win for Dignitas in this one. But my dud of the series, unfortunately, going to stay on AoE. It's going to go to SkyTech. I talked about how I liked him earlier on this week, but a pretty poor series. Bringing out the Rumble support here in your final game of the regular season is certainly a choice. It didn't end up working out. That pick ends up costing them a lot. He didn't really have a great Thresh game in game number 1 either, but SkyTech's a solid player. He's just not someone that I'm ever going to be super high on. His mechanics are interesting, but he's going to pull out some crazy picks. Sometimes they're going to work, sometimes they're not. Sometimes you're going to die 16 times across 2 games in a competitive setting, which just isn't particularly good. And it ended up costing AoE, especially in that game number 2. He certainly wasn't the only player in the series to play bad. Dark Wings played so good because I think Insanity continued his downward spiral. He has honestly been, I don't want to say a bad mid laner, but a bottom half mid laner in the NACL. And even that might be a little bit generous. He has not been good over the course of 2023 in my eyes. He's still a really talented player, and there are moments where it still shows up, but for the most part, when you look at the grand scheme, he's just not been the same player that he has been in years past. Hopefully he can figure it out once we get into playoffs, maybe once we get into summer, because right now it feels like whatever LCS trajectory he was back on after playing really well in Amateur and then coming back to Academy, just feels like a lot of that has kind of been derailed across 2023. But Dark Wings, Spawn, both playing fantastic. AoE's going to be incredibly excited about this win. Dignitas is probably going to be a little disappointed that they weren't able to take 2 games. They're going to be especially disappointed that they walked out of this feeling very uncomfortable about even taking 1 game. And so a lot of questions to be answered for this Dignitas team, but AoE kind of looking real hot going into playoffs, and definitely could be a team that, you run into one of these bottom tier challengers teams, could definitely surprise them and knock them out of the tournament. Moving on now to our 5th series of the day, and it's a battle between 2 teams that have really struggled to kind of separate themselves from the bottom teams. They are the bottom teams. We had Team Liquid First taking on FlyFam, 2 of the LCS-affiliated provisional teams here in the NACL. Both really struggling, but look at this. Is that a FlyFam 2-0? Is that their first 2-0 of the split It absolutely is. What a clutch time for them to come in and get their first win of the split. It doesn't matter. It doesn't put them in a better spot than TL first, but it's still kind of wild that it ended up happening. Really good stuff here from FlyFam, and a really good series. They honestly dominated the series. They were far and away the better team between these two teams, and a lot of that comes down to the bot lane just playing absolutely out of their minds. My player of the series, gonna go to Instinct, 15-0-21. What is that scoreline? An utterly dominant showing. Yes, in my opinion, they are going into the weakest bot lane in the NACL and LJX and in Rovex, but at the same time, you still got to be able to perform, and Instinct and Sword have really struggled to be able to separate themselves. I talked about them earlier in the week as a bot lane that does a really good job being able to pressure lanes that are significantly worse than them or obviously worse than them, and I think TLF definitely falls into that category, and we definitely saw that in this series, but it doesn't exactly entirely erase my worries that they're going to struggle against some of the better teams in the NACL, obviously going into playoffs. They're going to have to win against a bot lane that is relatively competent. This doesn't exactly prove that to me. What it proves to me, though, is that Instinct and Sword are still, at the very least, not awful, and that was definitely a question, I think, for a lot of this season. This was a really good showing from them. Obviously, Instinct was awesome. Sword was really good, too, but you gotta shout out Lunacia. I know I've been a lot lower on him as a player than a lot of other analysts out there. He's really high up in the solo kill leaderboard in the NACL. I think he's either number one or close to number one for all top laners, and that's pretty impressive, but I've always talked about the consistency, especially towards the mid game, when it comes to what Lunacia has been able to do. I think in this series, though, he was just awesome. Going into a genuinely good top laner in Surdy, easily the best player on TL first. And honestly, just looking better than him. I know team, has a lot to do with that. Surdy is a good player, and I still rank Surdy as a higher player than Lunacia, but, it's a good showing to see Lunacia really be able to step up, be able to generate that early lead, and then also be able to convert that into a lot of pressure in the mid to late game. That's the impressive part for me. Hopefully, he's going to learn from that and be able to do that a lot more consistently. If he's able to do that, I think he's one of the more interesting mechanical top lane prospects in the entire region. It's just about refining a lot of those mechanics and making proper decisions up on the top side. The other player, and the player that honestly I came very close to giving player of the series here, was Hyper in the jungle. Another really good series coming out from Hyper. He has clearly shown to be an upgrade here in the jungle role. He was someone who I was very out on by the time he ended up getting benched on TSM Academy last year. We can go back and look at that. That was a really good call of mine in mid-season where I was like, people aren't really calling it, but Hyper's probably going to get replaced on TSM. It ended up happening. And I'm really happy to see him bounce back here with a team like FlyFam, a team that was really struggling before he got here, and then he shows up, and now this team genuinely looks competitive. They went 4-4 this week. That's really solid, and honestly, big shout out to FlyFam. I really like what they're able to do just generally. It's not particularly easy to take a team that has really struggled to generate any wins and then just kind of turn them around really quickly. It's not easy to get your momentum and your mental back in the middle of the split, but it really feels like this team has turned a little bit of a new leaf, a new corner, and this series was a good way to show that. I think for TLF on the other side, though, this is disaster. I mean, this proves that you are not one of the, you are one of the bottom two teams in the league right now, and that was definitely proven in this series. You got absolutely blasted by a team that had yet to win a series 2-0 all year long, and it really wasn't close at all. My dud of the series is going to go to City Witty. In the jungle, Hyper was loads better in this series, being able to generate large leads in the early game, being able to keep them, being able to choke out that jungle pressure that I always talk about. City Witty was a big problem in that regard. He ends up going 1-11 in this series, and it's just not a very good showing. He has honestly kind of disappointed me over the course of the year so far. I know some people are really high on him and on his mechanics, and he's had some good games, but the decision-making, especially in the early game, it's very feast or famine for me, and that's certainly not what a team like TL First needs. They need someone who can generate leads consistently so that they can at least try to play from neutral, because they really don't play from neutral all that much. They either win early or they lose early, and the game is typically over from there. And a lot of that, in my opinion, is the jungle here. The other players that I think you got to point out for just not being very good, and this isn't a surprise, is the bot lane for TLF. I know they looked a little bit better earlier on this week, but they still are the weakest bot lane in the NACL by a large margin, in my opinion. LJX, Rovex, they're just not very good. They don't seem to have a lot of synergy. Obviously, they haven't played together very long. They're going to be a problem for TLF, and they're going to be a hindrance. I think this team is going to struggle to generate consistent leads in the early game because that 2v2 is consistently getting blasted, even by some of the weaker lanes in the league. Hopefully they can step up and at least be relevant. Not really hanging my hat on that. It's unfortunate, but it just doesn't seem like it's ever going to be a strength for this TLF team. Jungle doesn't seem like that either. Aspect has been better. Surdy's a solid player, but this team still is very far away from being a solid team, and they showed that off by getting blasted by one of the two bottom teams in the league. Really good for FlyFam, absolutely disastrous for TLF. That's basically the best way I can sum up this series. And that's going to bring us to our final best of 2 in the regular season here of the Spring Split. And it's definitely an intriguing matchup between Golden Guardians Challengers and Wild Card Gaming. A lot on the line here, a tiebreaker potentially on the line here, and we end up getting it because they do split 1-1. We'll obviously go over tiebreakers after we end up this day. I'll talk about that a bit after we end up this series here, but Golden Guardians doing a really good job in this series to be able to generate that Game 1 win. Unfortunately, just not able to convert it due to some uncharacteristic mistakes coming out from this team in Game number 2. I still think, generally speaking, they were the better team in this series, and that's why I've decided to give Prismal my player of the series. It was pretty easy to say that he was the best performing member of Golden Guardians. I would say their bot lane in general was definitely a huge advantage for them across both games. Game number 1 was very in favor of Golden Guardians, mostly through the advantage that their bot lane was able to generate for them. We'll talk about Lens and Duo King in a bit, but they were definitely a little bit of a weakness for Wildcard, as I think they have been for a lot of the season. But Prismal and Array still looking awesome. These two have continued to grow over the course of the year, and I think we've really settled on them potentially being like the best or the second best bot lane in the NACL. I know we've talked about them a bit, but 100 Thieves is up there, Cloud9's up there. There are a lot of good bot lanes in the NACL. You know, FlyQuest obviously is up there. Golden Guardians is right there with any of them on any given day. Prismo, we knew, was a pretty big star in that support position. He played really well last year when he converted to that position. Even when he got called up to the LCS, he played a lot better than a lot of people expected. And, you know, I think a lot of people are just kind of waiting for that LCS call-up to come from him. But, you know, he's kind of proven that. He's kind of proven that right, I would say, across NACL this split. One of the better supports in the entire region. And that is saying something, because that role is loaded. And the same thing can be said about Array in the AD carry role. A lot of really good young AD carries, but Array finally felt like he took that leap this year. We've kind of been waiting on that for a while. He's someone who's been given, I don't want to say a lot of chances, but he's certainly been hyped up for a little while by the community, and I just never really saw that. I talked about it in the preseason predictions, but in my opinion, 2023 is his best year as a pro. I think he's been really, really good for Golden Guardians. Him and Prismal seem to have a really good chemistry together that they started to develop last year, and that seems to have carried over. They are the big carries for Golden Guardians, make no mistake about that. I also want to give a big shout out to Concept. He was really good in this series, the better top laner, definitely. We'll get to that in a bit, because again, sorry, Moose Hater fans, I'm definitely one of you, but it just wasn't a very good series from him. Concept was really solid, though. These are the kinds of matchups that I think Concept does a really good job winning against other really volatile top laners. We know Concept can kind of be a little bit feast or famine up on the top side, especially with his champion picks, but when they hit, they really hit, and I think, you know, he played really well in this series. You gotta give him a lot of credit for that. That Game 1 was spectacular for him. He was very nearly my player of the game for Game number 1, but there are some negatives that go along with Golden Guardians, even if I do think they were the better team in this series, and most of that revolves around a mid laner that I really like in Young. He had a really bad final week of the season here in Week 7. That Game 2 coming out from him was a big reason why Wildcard was able to generate such a large lead, and that's disappointing. I like Young a lot as a player, and I was really hoping that he was going to prove to a lot of people that he deserved to be in that upper echelon of NACL mids, but some of the inconsistency that was kind of plaguing him in his previous teams before ending up joining Golden Guardians seems to have carried over. He had a great start to the year, but couldn't quite finish out the year nearly as strong. He was the weakness for Golden Guardians in this series, in my opinion, and that's a little unfortunate. But for the most part, this team still looked really, really good, and they are dangerous. As for Wildcard on the other side, I've kind of fallen out of love with this team, and I hate to say that, but I just don't believe in them in the same way that I did earlier on in the year. There were points in time where I was calling them a top 4 team in the NACL. I'm just not on that train anymore. They are simply too inconsistent for me to believe that. The dud of the series is going to be Moose Hater. I love Moose, I really do, but that Malphite game in Game 1 wasn't good. Playing it into a Malphite specialist in Concept, somebody who plays that champion a lot, and clearly it just didn't work out. And that's going to happen every once in a while, but man, I just want Moose to be significantly more consistent. He has some amazing games. We saw it at the beginning of the year. He had some incredible pop-off performances, obviously a lot of them on that Garen, but even outside of the Garen, he had some really good games, and it just feels like a lot of that has taken a little bit more of a backseat towards the second half of the season. This team has kind of struggled, in my opinion, to consistently generate wins, especially in the back half of the season, and that was not more evident than in Game number 1 here. He wasn't the only player on the team to play bad. I gotta shout out the bot lane as well. Lens and Duo King, like I said, kind of have been the weakness for this team. I don't think that they were particularly good over the course of the regular season, and I think now that we're starting to see, you know, good teams go up against them and be able to shut down top lane a little more, their flaws are getting exposed a little bit more by other really good bot lanes like Array and Prismal, and so Definitely some question marks for wildcard going into that final stretch, but at least jungle mid's still playing well. I think Saligo has been having quietly a very good season in the mid lane. I think Keel was easily this team's best player. He was my player of the game for game number 2. Without him, they would not have been in a good spot, and I think he's generally been this team's best player over the course of the year so far. So jungle mid going positive for wildcard, but everything else has got to fall into place. This team is very volatile. If top lane goes well, if bot lane can be solid, jungle mid's been performing well. This team still can win games. I just don't know if I believe in them in the same way that I did earlier on this year. And then for Golden Guardians, it's the opposite. This team has only climbed my power rankings over the weeks, and that is only continuing this week. This was a really good showing from them. They continue to look like a genuinely good team. This bot lane's legit. You know, top side has gotten a ton better. I think Rosethorn and Concept have been way better in recent weeks. I'm just a little bit worried. I hope Young can get back to the form that he showed at the beginning of the split, rather than what he's been showing this week and the past couple of weeks, because if you get all 5 of these players playing at a great point simultaneously, like, this is legitimately potentially a top 3 or 4 team in the NACL. But now it is time to jump into our coverage of the 2 tiebreakers in the NACL to end off our regular season. Now, a little bit of a different circumstance for both of these teams. You know, some are fighting for 4th or 5th place. Some are fighting for 8th or 9th place, right? The difference between these is definitely noticeable, but it's a provisional team that has overachieved expectations taking on a challengers team that really wants to be able to, quote-unquote, put them in their place, if you will. I'm excited to go over both of them, starting, of course, with our upper matchup. It's going to be a battle of teams at 19 and 11. We have Golden Guardians challengers taking on Cincinnati Fear. And the Fear win it here. It's obviously BO1 for tiebreakers. Big win for the Fear to be able to confirm their spot. If you would have told me at the beginning of the year that the Fear would be ending the regular season in 4th place, that is an absolutely massive accomplishment for a team that absolutely deserves it with how they have played up until this point. Really good game coming out of them. My player of the game is going to go to Perry in the jungle on this Wukong. He was able to establish so much pressure early. The Wukong into Viego matchup has to go the way of Wukong early. If Viego gets that snowball going, it is very difficult to shut him down, even in these teamfights, because as soon as he starts getting these resets, especially if one of them's on the Wukong, if he gets that ult reset and gets the passive off, that's going to be a very difficult champion to shut down and actually deal with. So incredibly imperative that Perry is able to generate a large lead in the early game, especially because you're looking at a, I don't know, Enchanter comp, like a Protect comp, if you will, with the Olaf. You've got Orianna. You've got Seraphine. I mean, this is pretty typical of what Fear wants to do. They want to play through their top laner in the late game, but their jungler in the early game. And I think they executed that comp incredibly well. Everybody played their role really, really solidly. Perry's going to get player of the game, but Shochi looked awesome on the Orianna. I love the fact that this team pulls out the Seraphine so commonly in the bot lane. It's clearly something they really like doing, and they can play it in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, you've got to ban out things like the Ashe, things like the Senna against this team, because they are going to want to play it in that bot lane with Seraphine, but you can do it with things like Nautilus as well, and it can still be incredibly oppressive, I guess I should say, to play against. But really, when you're talking about the carry-oriented style that this team has, it's going to be coming a lot from topside. It's going to be coming from Faisal. It's going to be coming from Perry. Both of them really, really good in this game. A huge win for the Fear just in general, but they're going to be especially happy that they were able to do it in a manner that feels so comfortable to them. This is a style I expect them to go back to when games increase in importance once we get to the playoffs. On the other side, though, we've got Golden Guardians challengers. Now, obviously, they're going to be a little disappointed that they weren't able to pick this up here, but 5th place is certainly not bad. I do have some concerns going into the playoffs, though. I actually was just talking about them because they played in the final series of the regular season, and I was talking about how Array, Prismal, even Rosethorn, even Concept were all kind of improving, playing better League of Legends than they had in a while, and I don't necessarily think that was entirely disproven here. I think that there were certainly moments where all those players had their problems, but for the most part, their problem continued to be Young in the mid lane. He's going to get my dud of the game here for Golden Guardians challengers. He just does not have a very good week 7, and that's disappointing because they were really relying on him to have a good week 7. He needed to be incredibly important for this comp. Obviously, you've got the Viego for resets. Garen can be a problem in the late game. Xayah and Rakan are going to scale well, but the Annie is strong here, and you're really going to need a lot of her damage to break through what the healing and the shielding of the other side is going to be offering. But Young was constantly out of position. He was targeted by that Wukong in a lot of cases. Annie doesn't really have a lot of survivability if she isn't, like, prepping for it. Like, if she gets ganked in the mid game and there really isn't a lot of prep for it, you don't have wards on it, you don't have stun up, like, there really isn't a lot of ways for her to be able to get out of that, especially with something as sticky as a Wukong, and so that was a bit of a problem for this team, and Young honestly has started to scare me. He wasn't great in this game, he wasn't great in Week 7, he has to step up for this team to be nearly as good as their potential could be in the playoffs. I mean, this is a team that genuinely could be reaching for, like, I don't want to say top 4 or top 3, but that's a realistic place, I think, for a team like Golden Guardians to be able to put themselves. But if their mid laner is playing like this, I just don't think they're going to be on that level. He was so good to start the year, and I'm such a big fan of Young as a player. I really want him to be able to rebound, but in recent weeks, it really just hasn't been great for the Golden Guardians mid laner. I still think that this team is strong. Array and Prismal are a great bot lane. They just weren't able to get a lot done against this very interesting bot lane on the side of Fear. They put a lot on Rosethorn's shoulders. He's just not the one you typically want in the carry-oriented role. Concept needed to really step up on the Garen, but you're going into Faisal, who's going to get funneled on this Olaf. It's just a difficult game to win if your bot lane's not going to be able to get ahead, and especially if your Annie's going to be completely out of the game. And so I'm not going to put it too much on Golden Guardians. It's just a best of one, but you're hoping that they're going to be able to regain their form and head into playoffs a little bit better. But for the Fear, this is exactly what you wanted to see. This is at worst a top 4 team in the NACL now. They have proven that in this series, and I'm just so happy for this team. It's so easy to cheer for them. They seem like such fantastic dudes. Like, they are very interesting personalities. A lot of the interviews they do are very entertaining, and it's always fun to cheer for the underdogs, which very much feels like Fear is. All of these players have shown so much growth over the course of the season. Faisal, Perry, Shochi, Manui, Trevor, I think all of them have gotten better over the course of 2023, and you can hear that in a lot of my analysis. Of course, you can track all that all throughout my videos all year long. You can see the development of how I talk about all of them. They have all become some of the best players in the NACL, and it's been an absolute joy to watch. I'm just hoping they're going to be able to keep it up once they really get into the thick of things in the playoffs, because this is a team that it wouldn't surprise me at all if they end up making a dangerous Cinderella run to the finals, we'll say. And that's going to lead us to our final tiebreaker game here for 8th place in the NACL. It's between Team Liquid Challengers and Wild Card Gaming. And the boys at Wild Card do it. They are able to pick up a massive win in a best of 1 here and move themselves on to side selection. That's what they gained here, because 8-9 play each other in the first round, which is really interesting. We're going to see these two teams play another best of 3 next week, but we got to see them play this week because, remember, they already played this week in Week 7, so it's interesting to see them get to play 3 games. Wildcard ends up walking out of that 2-1, which is a good sign for them, and this game was dominant. They were the better team by a large margin. They were able to generate a large lead in the early game. Again, a very eclectic draft coming out from Wildcard. I would expect nothing less in a winner-go-home game. The Bel'Veth coming out for Keel to give him the option of carrying the game, which I think is a great idea. He's been this team's most consistent player. You've got Saligo on the Annie, which can be useful. Lens and Duo King on an early game power lane that can cause a lot of surprises with Blitzcrank hooks. And then Moose Hater on something eclectic in the top lane that's going to do really well into whatever the enemy team does. In this case, the Malphite that he pulled out in the previous series, but this time into Fiora, into Wukong, into Ashe, into Leona. Like, this is a good pick with a lot of good value, and Wildcard ends up capitalizing on it. Keel is spectacular on the Bel'Veth. They do get the Bel'Veth ahead, and once you get a Bel'Veth ahead, even in Pro, that game is over. We've seen that basically globally on any scale, and we've seen that in the LEC a lot. We're now seeing it in the NACL. Keel did a great job. He's going to get player of the game for me on the side of Wildcard. Obviously, credit to his teammates for being able to set him up. We'll talk about them in a bit. There are a couple that I want to shout out in particular, but Keel was the big guy here for Wildcard. And I think, honestly, people might be mad at me for this, but Keel has been this team's best player all year. We can talk about Saligo being in that conversation as well. Moose Hater obviously had some great games, but the jungle mid are really what drove Wildcard forward, and they're really the strength of this team, in my opinion, when it comes down to game by game. And I think that's a positive because of the explosiveness that top lane gives you, because Duo King can pull out the Blitzcrank and dominate laning phase. When you have such a stable jungle mid, it allows those players to play even better, to give them more open opportunities, because they know if let's say Moose Hater gets super ahead in the top lane, well, you know jungle mid's going to be solid. So now you got a 3-pronged attack. Let's say Moose Hater maybe doesn't get ahead top lane. It's okay. Jungle and mid are still going to be strong. Like, that's how I felt with Wildcard for a lot of the year, and I think that's really come to fruition. Obviously, putting a lot in a jungle here was a good idea, but I'm not exactly sure that's going to be a strategy they go to every single game in the playoffs. It's just nice to know they can pull it out. I got to give a ton of credit to Duo King in the support position. His signature Blitzcrank, easily his best champion that he gets to pull out here in this game, and absolutely capitalize on it. You know, there are a lot of champions on the other side that do not want to get Blitzcrank hooked. Aurelion Sol was one of them. Ashe is certainly one of them. Even something like a Fiora, so long as she doesn't repost it, can really suffer getting hit by that Blitzcrank hook, and there was a lot of confusion that ended up being created not only in laning phase and mid-game skirmishes and late-game skirmishes, not that there were many, this game ended at 22 minutes, but Duo King was just a huge threat this game roaming around the map, another really solid game from him. Lens was good on the Caitlyn, Saligo was really good on the Annie, but Moose Hater was awesome in the top lane, absolutely brutalized Bradley. It's a great matchup for the Malphite. It's great that, Moose Hater is willing to bring out things like this. Obviously Garen's the signature one, but he's been playing crazy shit all summer long. I mean, the Zac, they had to ban out the Nunu. Obviously, that was more for Keel, but they had to ban that out this game. There's just so many options for Moose Hater, and this is a very matchup-specific pick that I think really worked out for him here. Really dominated that top lane. We'll get into it in a bit, but Moose Hater, Keel, Duo King, the 3 players on the team that I think really stood out. On the other side for TLC, you kind of got brutalized in this game, and I'm shocked. If I had to put money on who I thought was going to win this, I would have thought TLC was going to be able to take this. I would have thought they were the better team, but clearly I was proven wrong, and this wasn't particularly close. Bradley's going to get my dud of the game here. He just did nothing on the Fiora. You really need that pick to pop off because you're looking at a big team fight, mesh, I would say, for TLC, but unfortunately you're going into Bel'Veth, which is just always going to be a little bit of a problem. You need those Wukong knockups. Aurelion Sol needs to get online later in the game. Ashe is going to be able to help that. Leona's going to be better in those team fights. You really need this Fiora to get online to give you any semblance of win con outside of just 4v4s or 5v5s. And unfortunately for TLC, Bradley did not have a very good laning phase. Couldn't lane into a very bad matchup in the Malphite, and it ended up being game over, in my opinion, from that point onwards. Really, really unfortunate, but that's just the problem when you play against an enemy team comp like this. Wildcard threw down the gauntlet. They said, we're going to pick Bel'Veth, we're going to get her ahead, or we're going to lose, and they got her ahead, and then TLC lost. The game was in their hands, and unfortunately, they weren't able to do a lot with it. So unfortunate for TLC. I think they'll bounce back just fine. This series is going to be really interesting when we get to it, but credit to Wildcard. They played really, really well in this game, and they've got to be so incredibly excited to be able to go and get side selection for the first round of the playoffs. Alright, that is going to do it for my NACL Week 7 overview analysis and my spring split overall analysis. I hope you guys enjoyed. We put a lot of time and effort into making these videos. I really do hope you guys enjoyed the content. It's not over, of course. We've got a full helping of playoff coverage coming on this channel. There's going to be a lot of playoff games, so I'm excited to talk about them, but up on your screen right now, you're going to see the updated NACL standings, the final NACL standings for the spring split. Obviously, no ties because we know where the seeds are. We had tiebreakers and everything. In the first column to the right, you're going to see where I personally power rank those teams. In the second column, you're going to see how those have changed from last week to this week. Let's go over the risers and the fallers, and I'm going to quickly preface this before we jump into anything. Like I said earlier, there's going to be a lot of movement here because this is truly where I feel these teams are going to fall come playoff time, and that's more so what I wanted to power rank them based on. In the link in the description, you are going to find a nice little March Madness, NACL-style March Madness bracket. It was made by the Proving Grounds pod. I'm sure you guys who watch this video already know who they are, but they made a nice little March Madness bracket that you can kind of make for yourself to kind of preview what you think is going to happen in the playoffs here in spring, and I filled one out. The link to that to view it is going to be in the description. I'm not going to go through all of it in this video, but you can check it out there. Of course, also, the link to the blank one where you can make one yourself is also going to be down there. If you guys want to tweet at me, I'm on Twitter at SuperKmanrocks. You can tweet me your predictions here. I'd love to take a look at them, even send them to me in DMs or whatever. I'd love to, have a nice little chat about where we think some teams are going to land, but if you want my exact playoff predictions, they're going to be down in the description below, but they're kind of up on the screen now as well because the power rankings are really a good indicator of where I think the team's strengths lie. So let's go with the risers, the fallers. Staying at number 1 is Cloud9. I still think they're the favorites, and they're going to be my pick to win playoffs. But number 2 for me, it's going to be FlyQuest. I know that is a major, major leap to take, and I know they didn't exactly look great in their final series of the year. They're finishing 7th, but this team has too much talent. I think they are going to be able to put it together, and I think they're going to be very dangerous in the playoffs. Coming in at 3, I still have The Fear. At 4 is still 100 Thieves. Well, where's Dignitas? Well, 5 is CLG, jumping all the way up from number 9. They had a really good week. They're going to be a very tough out in the playoffs. Dignitas, for me, falls all the way to number 6. I told you there's going to be some controversial opinions here. I think Dignitas is going to be an early out in the playoffs, or at least earlier than expected. Obviously, top 6 is still a really good team, but this is a team I could definitely see struggling. They have drawn their last 6 series in a row, and I know that, you look at a team like Fear, and they've drawn 3 in a row, but all those are against top teams. Dignitas has not been drawing series against top teams. They've been struggling to beat everybody, and it's just the consistency with this team. I think they're going to get exposed once we start getting into the best of 3s, and especially into the best of 5s. I think Dignitas is going to struggle a bit more than people expect. Golden Guardians down at 7. I still have TL at 8 and Wildcard at 9. Some people are going to be mad about that, but it's just my personal opinion. I think once we get into a best-of-3 team, Liquid should be the better team, even though Wildcard was able to take it this week. It'll be interesting. Obviously, those two teams are really close. Immortals at 10, TSM at 11. That means Evil Geniuses fall down to 12th. They are the lowest-ranked Challengers team for me, and they are definitely not where they need to be. AoE stays at 13, and then finally FlyFam jumping TL first after a dominant win over them in the final week. But those are my power ranking. Those are my standings. Let's go over Player of the Week and Dud of the Week for Week 7. I almost forgot to do that, but let's go ahead and get into that. My Player of the Week for Week 7 is going to go to Darkwings on AoE. I'm really happy to be able to give him this award. AoE was really good in the final week of the season here, playing 3 series and looking really solid in all of them. Darkwings has just been a really consistent player, especially over the back half of the year for AoE. I'm really hoping that carries into their playoff performances because he was a lot of fun to watch. Unfortunately, I also have to give out a Dud of the Week. And unfortunately, my Dud of the Week for the final week here in the regular season is going to go to Yukino on 100 Thieves Challengers. Just did not like the week that jungler had. I think he's kind of been a little bit of a hindrance for 100 Thieves. There is a reason that I have them ranked slightly below the Fear at 3 and 4. I think those two teams are very comparable, but they come in slightly below because I just don't trust Yukino in the same way that I trust a jungler like Perry. But obviously, he's got a ton of talent. He's one of the youngest players in the entire league. I think the youngest, now that Sniper isn't going to be playing in the playoffs, and that definitely is a boon. He can still grow, and I hope he does. I hope this jungle mid does get better, but for now, at least in Week 7, Yukino's going to get my Dud of the Week, and Darkwings is going to get my Player of the Week, but that's going to do it. I really do hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, let me know down in the comment section below. I love to hear from you guys. You guys really are one of the best communities that I have. I know the NACL sphere isn't as large as maybe, you know, my LEC videos or my LPL videos or anything like that, but you guys are still a lot of fun to have conversations with. You're always very passionate and very detailed. I really do appreciate all of you. Of course, if you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. It really means a lot. This is 2 hours long, and these are hard to make. It's 5:30 in the morning where I am at right now. You know, full-time job and everything. Got to get these out after work, but it really does mean a lot that you guys are enjoying the content, and to show me that, you know, I hate to ask for this kind of stuff. I really hate to beg, but the like really does mean a lot for me. I really do appreciate it. Of course, if you're new here, hit subscribe. I doubt you made it through 2 hours of an NACL thing if you're new here, but I really do appreciate it. With all that being said, of course, though, I hope you all are having a great day. I hope you continue to have a great day. And I will see you all later.